Tonight, we're exploring a side of medieval history that challenges everything we thought we knew. For centuries, myths and legends were dismissed as fantasy until historians began uncovering evidence showing that many were grounded in real events, real people, and real cultural practices more unsettling than fiction. Berserkers truly fought in trance-like fury, dancing plagues claimed actual lives, and trial by ordeal functioned as legitimate judicial procedure. So if you thought medieval life was only knights, castles, and fairy tale imagery, prepare to reconsider those assumptions as we uncover the hidden truths buried beneath legend. Before we begin, pause for a moment like this video if you enjoy unraveling the darker, stranger chapters of history, and share where you're watching from as our community gathers across time zones. Dim the lights, settle in, and open your mind. Because the legends we once laughed off as exaggerated or impossible sometimes turned out to be real and far more disturbing than the stories that preserved them. Violence shaped political life through conquest, defense, and internal conflict, influencing borders and social structures. Armies required resources, logistics, and taxation, demonstrating administrative capacity even amid instability. War brought destruction to civilians whose lives were altered by displacement, famine, and insecurity. Yet conflict also produced technological change in fortification, weaponry, and organization. Political legitimacy was often determined by force, reinforcing hierarchies that privileged elites. Communities rebuilt after conflict, restoring livelihoods and forming narratives to justify loss. Violence was not exception but enduring reality that shaped medieval identity and memory. Religion offered comfort and authority, defining moral order while influencing law, education, and daily life. The church provided explanations for suffering, framing disease, famine, and war within spiritual meaning. Monasteries preserved knowledge, administered charity, and shaped intellectual traditions across regions. Religious rituals reinforced cohesion, offering psychological security during crisis. Yet doctrine also justified persecution and conflict, revealing tension between compassion and control. Pilgrimage and devotion reflected attempts to reconcile hope with hardship. Religion shaped responses to adversity while legitimizing power structures. Economic life relied on agriculture, trade, and labor systems that connected rural villages to emerging towns and long-distance markets. Peasants endured heavy obligations while supporting elites through taxes and service, contributing to persistent inequality. Urbanization created opportunities in commerce and crafts, forming guilds that regulated quality and competition. Merchants facilitated cultural exchange, transporting goods, technologies, and ideas across borders. Environmental pressures such as climate shifts and disease affected productivity and stability. Adaptation demonstrated resilience and innovation despite recurring crises. The economy reflected human ingenuity under constraint. Law evolved through custom, royal authority, and religious courts, each shaping justice according to distinct priorities. Punishments emphasized deterrence through public display, reflecting concern for order rather than humanitarian principles. Written codes emerged gradually, formalizing procedures and establishing precedents that shaped later legal systems. Local communities used negotiation and oath-taking to resolve disputes when centralized authority weakened. Legal inequalities mirrored social hierarchy, reinforcing privilege while limiting recourse for common people. Yet reform responded slowly to changing circumstances and expectations. Medieval law represented control and adaptation in pursuit of stability. Art and cultural expression conveyed identity through architecture, literature, and visual symbolism. Cathedrals demonstrated engineering skill and religious ambition, reflecting immense resources and labor. Manuscripts preserved intellectual traditions, transmitting scientific observation and theological doctrine. Music and performance reinforced communal values while offering emotional expression. Artistic production endured despite hardship, revealing commitment to meaning and legacy. Cultural achievements illuminate anxieties, aspirations, and beliefs central to the era. Creativity sought permanence amid uncertainty and struggle. Power in the medieval world concentrated among monarchs, nobles, and clergy, shaping political life through authority, inheritance, and conflict. Kings asserted legitimacy through divine sanction and lineage, while nobles enforced regional control through feudal obligation. Clergy influenced governance by framing moral authority and administering law, education, and diplomacy. Common people supported these institutions through labor, military service, and taxation, reinforcing social hierarchy. Rival claims to authority fueled disputes that reshaped borders and alliances. Chronicles reveal how ambition determined opportunity for elites and insecurity for commoners. Power defined social order and dictated the terms of survival. Feudalism structured society through reciprocal obligations linking land, labor, and loyalty, creating predictable but restrictive systems. Lords granted land to vassals in exchange for military service, forming networks of protection and control. Peasants worked land under binding agreements, providing resources and stability for elite households. Social mobility was limited, reinforcing inherited roles and economic dependence across generations. Documents show instances of cooperation and conflict, revealing negotiation rather than automatic compliance. Feudal obligations shaped daily life, influencing work, protection, and justice. The system balanced stability with inequality, defining medieval governance. Urbanization challenged traditional authority by fostering trade, specialization, and civic autonomy in growing towns. Charters granted rights that reduced feudal oversight and encouraged economic initiative. Guilds regulated production, protected members, and ensured standards that shaped urban identity. Merchants accumulated wealth and influence, introducing alternative paths to power beyond hereditary status. Cities faced challenges including overcrowding, sanitation problems, and susceptibility to disease outbreaks. Urban life offered opportunity yet revealed vulnerability, highlighting contrasts between prosperity and hardship. The rise of towns marked shifting priorities in medieval society. Diplomacy managed relationships among kingdoms, balancing war, alliance, and negotiation to preserve or expand authority. Ambassadors carried messages, negotiated treaties, and sought compromise to avoid costly conflict. Dynastic marriages reinforced alliances and shaped succession, intertwining political and personal agendas. Treaties addressed borders, trade rights, and religious disputes, demonstrating institutional attempts to manage instability. Diplomatic failure often led to war, revealing limitations of negotiation in competitive environments. Successes stabilized regions and reduced suffering, revealing pragmatic attempts to maintain order. Diplomacy illustrated the pursuit of coexistence amid rivalry. Environmental pressures shaped medieval life by influencing agriculture, settlement, and population stability. Climate shifts affected crop yields, prompting migration and adaptation to sustain food supply. Natural disasters disrupted communities, revealing vulnerabilities in infrastructure and preparation. Disease outbreaks exploited weaknesses in sanitation and medical understanding, contributing to demographic decline. Responses included improved storage, irrigation, and agricultural practices designed to mitigate risk. Survival depended on cooperation and resources, demonstrating human resilience under stress. The natural world shaped opportunity and limitation alike. Cultural exchange occurred through trade, conquest, and religious missions, introducing new technologies and ideas across regions. Contact with Islamic, Byzantine, and Asian societies transmitted scientific knowledge, navigation techniques, and medical practices. Crusades facilitated exchange despite violence, spreading cultural influence alongside military ambition. Universities emerged as centers of learning, synthesizing classical texts with contemporary scholarship. Translation movements preserved and expanded knowledge, challenging isolation. Intellectual exchange influenced art, science, and governance. Medieval culture evolved through interaction rather than isolation. Violence remained a defining force in medieval society, shaping borders, hierarchy, and collective memory. Raids, invasions, and civil wars altered population distribution and disrupted agricultural cycles. Military campaigns demanded taxation, logistics, and conscription, revealing administrative sophistication amid instability. Civilians suffered displacement, famine, and insecurity as armies passed through their lands. Chronicles documented not only battles but the devastation left behind, emphasizing human cost. Warfare accelerated technological development in fortification and weaponry, reflecting adaptation. Violence shaped identity and governance, becoming an enduring constant rather than an exception. Knighthood emerged as a military and social institution grounded in ideals of honor, loyalty, and service. Training began in childhood, demanding discipline, physical skill, and obedience to lords. Knights symbolized elite status, receiving land and income in exchange for their martial duties. Chivalric codes attempted to regulate behavior, balancing martial ambition with ethical expectations. Literature romanticized knighthood, while historical accounts revealed contradictions between ideal and practice. Knights served as both protectors and aggressors, reflecting complexities of power. The institution embodied both nobility and violence in medieval society. Castles served as symbols of authority and defense, reflecting economic investment and political ambition. Their construction required labor, technology, and resources, demonstrating organizational capacity. Fortifications protected populations and secured trade routes, shaping settlement patterns across regions. Siege warfare tested engineering skills, weapon innovation, and strategic planning. Civilians endured hardship during sieges, facing starvation and displacement. Archaeological evidence reveals evolution in design responding to new threats and tactics. Castles represented control, security, and fear in equal measure. Religious conflict intensified divisions as competing interpretations of doctrine fueled persecution and war. Heresy trials attempted to enforce orthodoxy, reflecting institutional anxiety over dissent. Crusades mobilized populations under religious justification, producing violence and cultural exchange. Conflict reshaped borders, economies, and social relations, leaving enduring legacies. These struggles exposed tension between faith and humanitarian values. Religious authorities sought unity but contributed to division and suffering. Belief shaped both conflict and reconciliation in the medieval world. Disease and famine revealed systemic vulnerabilities, overwhelming communities and institutions during crisis. Population decline affected labor, military strength, and economic stability. Religious and medical explanations attempted to interpret suffering, revealing limitations in knowledge. Survivors rebuilt through cooperation, innovation, and adaptation in agriculture and infrastructure. Chronicles record despair and resilience, preserving lessons for future generations. Environmental stress reshaped social relations and resource distribution. Human endurance confronted nature's unpredictability, shaping collective memory and reform. Commerce and exploration expanded horizons, connecting distant regions through maritime and overland trade. Merchants transported goods, ideas, and technologies, enriching material culture and knowledge. Ports and markets became hubs of interaction, fostering diversity and economic growth. Exploration challenged geographical assumptions and inspired ambition for wealth and influence. Political competition accompanied commercial expansion, shaping alliances and conflict. Economic opportunity created social mobility for some, while reinforcing inequality for others. Trade and exploration reshaped medieval societies and global connections. Medical knowledge in the medieval world blended empirical practice, classical inheritance, and religious belief in attempts to understand illness and healing. Physicians studied humoral theory, anatomy, and herbal remedies, applying treatments based on observation and tradition. Hospitals emerged under religious patronage, providing care and charity alongside spiritual guidance. Communities relied on midwives and healers who possessed practical knowledge rooted in experience. Disease outbreaks tested medical understanding and public response, revealing both compassion and limitation. Treatment aimed to relieve suffering within available frameworks rather than indifference. Medieval medicine represented an evolving pursuit of healing amid uncertainty. Legal systems developed through royal authority, customary law, and ecclesiastical courts, reflecting diverse sources of jurisdiction. Written codes formalized procedures, establishing precedents that shaped justice across regions. Punishments emphasized deterrence through public display, revealing priorities of order over humanitarian concerns. Local communities resolved disputes through negotiation, oath-taking, and shared expectations when central control was weak. Social inequalities influenced legal outcomes, limiting recourse for marginalized groups. Yet reforms gradually responded to shifting moral and political priorities. The evolution of law demonstrated efforts to balance stability and fairness. Education expanded through monastic schools, cathedral institutions, and emerging universities that preserved and transmitted knowledge. Curriculum emphasized theology, philosophy, law, and medicine, reflecting intellectual priorities. Scholars engaged in debate and translation, synthesizing ancient texts with contemporary inquiry. Literacy supported administration, record-keeping, and religious instruction, shaping governance and culture. Intellectual pursuits sometimes challenged authority, prompting censorship and reform. Education fostered leadership and innovation in governance and scholarship. Medieval learning reflected devotion to knowledge and institutional authority. Economic specialization increased productivity, supporting growth in agriculture, crafts, and trade networks. Artisans developed skills for local and international markets, contributing to urban development. Guilds regulated professions, maintaining standards, training apprentices, and protecting members' rights. Agricultural improvements, including crop rotation and better tools, increased yields and supported population growth. Surpluses facilitated commercial expansion and long-distance trade, enriching material culture. Economic diversification reduced risk and dependency. Medieval economies adapted to hardship through innovation and cooperation. Family and community structures shaped daily life, establishing roles, expectations, and social support. Marriage reinforced alliances, facilitated property transfer, and reflected economic priorities. Children contributed labor and inheritance, preserving lineage and sustaining household economies. Gender roles structured opportunity and responsibility, though variations existed across class and region. Community networks provided help during illness, conflict, and celebration, fostering cohesion. Social bonds balanced inequality with cooperation. These relationships sustained identity and survival in medieval society. Art and literature expressed devotion, authority, and identity through architecture, manuscripts, performance, and symbolism. Cathedrals demonstrated religious ambition and engineering capability, reflecting collective investment. Illuminated manuscripts preserved narrative, doctrine, and scientific observation for future generations. Music and drama reinforced communal values, enhancing ritual and civic life. Cultural production persisted despite hardship, revealing belief in legacy and meaning. Artistic achievements offer insight into aspirations and anxieties of the era. Creativity provided permanence amid impermanence, shaping memory and heritage. The medieval worldview integrated faith, observation, and inherited knowledge to interpret natural and social phenomena within a coherent framework. People explained events through divine providence, tradition, and empirical experience, seeking meaning in hardship and prosperity. Intellectuals debated philosophy and science, balancing rational inquiry with theological boundaries. Communities relied on rituals, storytelling, and collective memory to understand uncertainty and reinforce identity. This worldview shaped responses to crisis, innovation, and daily life. Belief and inquiry coexisted, revealing efforts to reconcile mystery with observation. The medieval mind sought order in a world marked by instability and transformation. Authority derived from lineage, conquest, and religious sanction, creating hierarchies that structured governance and social interaction. Monarchs asserted legitimacy through ritual and warfare, while nobles maintained regional control through feudal networks. Clergy reinforced moral authority, mediating between divine and secular power. Peasants and commoners supported these institutions through labor, allegiance, and taxation. Dissent challenged hierarchy, prompting reform or suppression depending on circumstance. Authority shaped opportunity and vulnerability, determining access to justice and resources. Power dynamics defined medieval society and influenced collective experience. Trade networks facilitated cultural exchange, linking Europe with Africa, Asia, and the Middle East through maritime and overland routes. Goods such as spices, textiles, and metals circulated alongside ideas, technologies, and religious beliefs. Merchants navigated political risk and environmental challenge to secure profit and influence. Market regulation ensured stability and quality, supporting economic growth and civic rights. Exchange broadened perspective and fostered adaptation, challenging isolation. Economic interaction encouraged competition and cooperation among states. Trade shaped medieval transformation and interconnectedness. Conflict remained prevalent as kingdoms defended borders, expanded territory, and pursued dominance through force. Siege warfare evolved with advancements in fortification and weaponry, reflecting tactical innovation. Infantry and cavalry tactics adapted to terrain and logistics, demonstrating military organization. Diplomacy attempted to mitigate destruction but often failed due to competing ambition. Civilians bore the burden of warfare, facing displacement, famine, and devastation. Violence influenced political outcomes and cultural narratives. Warfare defined medieval power struggles and reshaped social memory. Communities rebuilt after disaster through cooperation, resourcefulness, and innovation, adapting to environmental and social pressures. Institutions provided structure and aid, supporting recovery efforts and continuity. Cultural memory preserved lessons, reinforcing resilience and caution for future generations. Religious interpretation offered solace and meaning, contextualizing suffering within spiritual belief. Reforms emerged to address vulnerabilities and prevent recurrence where possible. Recovery demonstrated perseverance and adaptability. Medieval societies confronted crisis with determination and mutual support. Cultural legacy endures through architecture, literature, law, and tradition, shaping modern understanding of the medieval world. Preservation reveals ambition, devotion, and ingenuity that transcended hardship. The era influenced governance, social organization, and artistic expression, leaving lasting marks on institutions and identity. Its complexities challenge simplistic portrayals of darkness or stagnation. Studying this period illuminates human struggle, resilience, and aspiration. The medieval legacy invites reflection on continuity and change. Historical memory shapes how we interpret past experience and future possibility. Agricultural life formed the backbone of medieval society, shaping daily routines, economic survival, and community structure. Peasants cultivated crops and managed livestock under obligations to landlords, supporting both local sustenance and feudal demands. Seasonal rhythms dictated work, influencing planting, harvest, and storage practices critical to survival. Tools and techniques evolved gradually, reflecting adaptation to climate and soil conditions. Vulnerability to famine underscored dependence on weather, labor, and resource management. Community cooperation facilitated shared labor and protection during peak agricultural periods. The agricultural foundation sustained medieval life and defined relationships between land, labor, and authority. Craftsmanship advanced material culture by producing goods essential for domestic life, trade, and military needs. Artisans developed specialized skills in metalwork, textiles, pottery, and construction, contributing to economic diversification. Guilds structured training, regulated quality, and strengthened occupational identity while shaping urban economies. Skilled labor supported infrastructure, defense, and artistic expression, reflecting both utility and ambition. Innovation occurred through experimentation and cultural exchange, improving technique and efficiency. Craft production created social mobility for some, though inequality persisted. The role of artisans demonstrated ingenuity and adaptation in medieval society. Maritime activity expanded economic and cultural horizons through fishing, transport, and long-distance trade. Ports facilitated exchange between regions, connecting inland markets with international networks. Shipbuilding incorporated technological improvements, enabling safer and more ambitious voyages. Navigation relied on experience, observation, and emerging instruments that increased accuracy. Maritime ventures carried risk from storms, piracy, and political dispute, revealing both opportunity and danger. Coastal communities depended on maritime resources for livelihood and prosperity. The sea offered wealth and uncertainty, shaping medieval interaction across borders. Administrative systems developed to manage resources, enforce law, and record transactions within kingdoms and local jurisdictions. Bureaucracy expanded through written documentation, taxation, and census practices. Literacy among officials supported governance and communication, strengthening centralized authority. Administrative reforms attempted to standardize procedures and reduce corruption, though results varied. Courts, councils, and officials mediated disputes and facilitated policy implementation. Record-keeping preserved evidence of governance, economy, and social organization. Administration revealed the growing complexity of medieval political structures. Religious institutions influenced social welfare by providing charity, education, and hospital care to vulnerable populations. Monasteries distributed food during famine, sheltered travelers, and aided the sick, reinforcing spiritual and communal duty. Clergy mediated conflict, offered counseling, and taught literacy, supporting stability. Religious patronage funded construction of churches, schools, and infrastructure, shaping urban and rural landscapes. However, authority could also reinforce inequality and suppress dissent. Spiritual guidance coexisted with institutional ambition, revealing dual roles. Religious life shaped values and social responsibility in medieval communities. Cultural identity developed through language, customs, and shared memory, creating cohesion amid political and economic diversity. Oral tradition preserved history, myth, and moral lessons, reinforcing generational continuity. Literature articulated social ideals, fears, and aspirations, reflecting both elite and popular perspectives. Festivals and rituals strengthened communal bonds, offering respite and meaning during hardship. Cultural interaction introduced new practices and beliefs, enriching identity while provoking debate. Symbols, monuments, and narratives shaped collective understanding of past and present. Cultural identity anchored medieval societies in shared experience and evolving tradition. The structure of medieval warfare relied on hierarchy, discipline, and logistics, demonstrating organization beyond simple violence. Commanders coordinated infantry, cavalry, and siege equipment according to terrain and strategic objectives. Supply chains transported food, weapons, and materials, revealing planning necessary for sustained campaigns. Communication through banners, messengers, and signals facilitated coordination on the battlefield. Training and drill improved cohesion, reflecting professionalization among elite forces. Despite organization, warfare inflicted immense suffering on civilians and soldiers alike. The mechanics of war revealed both human ingenuity and vulnerability. Fortifications evolved in response to changing tactics and weapon technology, shaping landscapes and military strategy. Early designs emphasized wooden palisades, which later developed into stone castles and fortified towns. Defensive structures incorporated towers, moats, and gatehouses to resist siege engines and assault. Builders experimented with geometry and engineering to strengthen walls and minimize weak points. Archaeological remains show adaptation to gunpowder weapons in later centuries. Fortifications protected communities yet symbolized domination and control. Architecture reflected the continual arms race between offense and defense. Social class influenced access to power, wealth, and opportunity, defining roles within feudal and urban systems. Nobles controlled land and military service, while merchants gained influence through trade and finance. Peasants supported the economy through labor, yet faced limited mobility and legal restrictions. Artisans and guild members achieved status through skill and collective organization. Social expectations defined behavior, marriage, and inheritance, reinforcing hierarchy. Tension emerged between aspiration and constraint, prompting negotiation and occasional conflict. Class shaped medieval life, revealing both stability and inequality. Monasticism shaped religious life through discipline, scholarship, and service, influencing spirituality and community. Monks adhered to rules emphasizing prayer, labor, and contemplation, reinforcing devotion. Monasteries preserved manuscripts, documented history, and advanced agricultural and medical knowledge. Their economic activities included farming, brewing, and craftsmanship, supporting self-sufficiency. Hospitality extended to travelers and the poor, demonstrating social responsibility. Yet monastic wealth sometimes attracted criticism and reform. Monastic institutions balanced spiritual ideals with practical influence. Language and communication developed through regional dialects, written scripts, and administrative records, shaping identity and governance. Latin served as lingua franca among scholars and clergy, facilitating intellectual exchange. Vernacular languages emerged in literature, broadening access to cultural expression. Written documentation supported law, trade, and diplomacy, strengthening institutional memory. Oral tradition preserved folklore, genealogy, and communal knowledge. Literacy remained limited but expanded through education and administration. Language reflected social change and cultural diversity. Entertainment and leisure provided respite from labor and conflict, contributing to social cohesion and cultural expression. Festivals marked religious and seasonal events, reinforcing shared identity. Music, storytelling, and performance conveyed moral lessons and collective memory. Games and competitions fostered community and celebrated skill. Nobles enjoyed hunting and tournaments, reflecting status and martial culture. Feasts and gatherings strengthened bonds and offered temporary relief from hardship. Leisure balanced duty, offering meaning and joy within medieval life. The medieval church exercised profound influence over law, governance, and cultural life, shaping moral frameworks and social expectations. Clerical authority extended into education, administration, and diplomacy, positioning religious leaders as mediators between divine and secular spheres. Councils and synods debated doctrine and policy, reinforcing unity while confronting dissent. The Church administered rites that marked birth, marriage, and death, integrating faith into daily life. Reform movements emerged in response to corruption and political entanglements, reflecting tension between ideals and practice. Religious authority offered guidance and legitimacy, yet contributed to division and conflict. Its influence permeated institutions, beliefs, and identity across medieval society. Heretical movements challenged religious orthodoxy by questioning doctrine, authority, and institutional power. Dissenters emphasized spiritual purity, personal interpretation, or social reform, provoking concern among church leaders. Inquisitorial procedures sought to identify and suppress heresy, reflecting fear of fragmentation. Trials and persecution revealed efforts to maintain unity through coercion rather than persuasion. Some movements anticipated later theological and social reforms, demonstrating evolving belief. The suppression of heresy exposed limits of tolerance and resilience of institutional authority. Religious conflict shaped cultural memory and social change. Pilgrimage represented devotion, penance, and communal identity, guiding believers across regions to sacred sites. Travelers sought healing, forgiveness, or spiritual insight, reinforcing faith through shared experience. Pilgrimage routes fostered economic activity, supporting inns, markets, and craftsmanship. Encounters with diverse cultures broadened perspective and facilitated exchange. Risks included illness, theft, and hardship, reflecting vulnerability and commitment. Pilgrimage embodied both personal transformation and public display of belief. It connected local communities to wider religious networks. Religious architecture symbolized devotion, authority, and artistic ambition, reflecting theological and cultural priorities. Cathedrals showcased engineering innovation through vaults, buttresses, and stained glass. Construction required labor, resources, and patronage, demonstrating economic and political coordination. Decoration communicated doctrine and narrative, educating congregations through imagery. Architectural styles evolved through interaction with regional traditions and technological advancement. Churches served as centers for worship, governance, and social life. Built environments shaped spiritual experience and collective identity. Ritual and liturgy structured worship, reinforcing doctrine and fostering communal participation. Services incorporated music, prayer, and scripture, shaping rhythm of daily and annual life. Clergy fulfilled roles as teachers, counselors, and leaders, guiding moral behavior. Rituals offered psychological comfort during crisis and celebration, reinforcing social bonds. Liturgical change reflected theological debate and reform, illustrating adaptation. Participation varied across class and gender, revealing social dynamics within religious practice. Ritual expressed belief, authority, and identity. Relics and saints influenced devotion, shaping pilgrimage, prayer, and memory through association with holiness. Communities venerated remains and artifacts believed to mediate divine power. Shrines attracted pilgrims, generating economic and cultural significance. Stories of miracles reinforced belief and institutional legitimacy. Doubt and controversy emerged regarding authenticity, prompting investigation and debate. The cult of saints reflected desire for intercession amid uncertainty. Relics embodied connection between physical world and spiritual hope. Royal authority relied on symbolism, ritual, and administration to legitimize rule and maintain control over diverse territories. Coronation ceremonies reinforced divine sanction, linking monarchs to sacred tradition and historical continuity. Royal households coordinated governance, finance, and diplomacy, demonstrating organizational capacity. Patronage rewarded loyalty and secured alliances, influencing social and political networks. Monarchs navigated tension between central authority and regional autonomy, balancing concession and coercion. Success depended on military strength, administrative reform, and public perception. Kingship represented ambition, obligation, and vulnerability in medieval governance. Courts functioned as centers of administration, justice, and cultural display, shaping policy and hierarchy. Officials managed taxation, land tenure, and legal disputes, supporting centralized control. Court life reflected etiquette and ceremony, reinforcing social distinction and loyalty. Diplomats, scholars, and artisans contributed to intellectual and artistic production within royal circles. Competition for favor influenced careers and alliances, revealing political dynamics. Courts mediated between monarchy and nobility, facilitating negotiation and asserting authority. Their influence extended beyond palace walls, shaping governance and culture. Nobility held regional power through land ownership, military obligation, and judicial authority, forming essential components of feudal structure. Castles and estates symbolized wealth and influence, anchoring territorial control. Nobles administered justice, collected dues, and maintained defense, reflecting economic and political responsibility. Feuds and alliances reshaped regional boundaries, revealing instability and negotiation. Courtly culture emphasized honor, hospitality, and lineage, reinforcing identity. Tension between nobles and monarchs shaped policy and conflict. The aristocracy balanced autonomy with allegiance, defining medieval power relations. Peasant life centered on labor, community, and obligation, sustaining economic and social systems. Work followed agricultural rhythms, demanding endurance and cooperation. Obligations included rent, taxes, and services to landlords, reflecting economic hierarchy. Village governance relied on custom, negotiation, and shared responsibility. Festivals and rituals offered respite, reinforcing social cohesion. Hardship shaped resilience and adaptation, influencing traditions and aspirations. Peasant experience revealed complexity beyond mere oppression or passivity. Urban elites gained influence through trade, finance, and administration, challenging traditional hierarchies. Merchant families accumulated wealth, secured charters, and shaped civic institutions. Guild leaders regulated commerce and represented urban interests in negotiation with monarchy and nobility. Urban governance addressed infrastructure, sanitation, and defense, reflecting communal investment. Economic opportunity fostered social mobility and patronage of art and education. Yet inequality persisted within city walls, dividing wealth and labor. Urban elites redefined status through economic rather than hereditary means. Social mobility remained limited but possible, influenced by marriage, patronage, military service, and economic success. Education enabled entry into administration or clerical positions, expanding opportunity. Commerce offered wealth for ambitious individuals, altering social trajectories. Military distinction could elevate status through reward and recognition. Religious life provided pathways through monastic or clerical advancement. Mobility challenged rigid hierarchy while reinforcing competition. Medieval society balanced tradition with ambition, shaping individual and collective identity. Diplomacy shaped medieval politics through negotiation, marriage, and alliance, serving as an alternative to open conflict. Envoys carried messages, proposed treaties, and gathered intelligence, reflecting trust and responsibility. Marriage secured bonds between ruling families, influencing succession and territorial claims. Trade agreements linked regions economically, promoting stability and cooperation. Diplomacy navigated rivalry, ambition, and fear, balancing advantage and compromise. Success required patience, tact, and knowledge of customs. International relations reflected power and vulnerability in a fragmented world. Marriage politics influenced dynastic continuity, territorial expansion, and alliance networks, integrating personal and political goals. Noble families sought advantageous matches to secure land, wealth, and legitimacy. Negotiations involved dowries, inheritance rights, and strategic considerations. Royal marriages shaped borders and sparked disputes over succession. Women served as diplomatic agents through marriage, counsel, and patronage. Marriage could unite rivals or intensify rivalry, depending on circumstance. The institution reflected ambition, duty, and constraint in medieval life. War remained central to political power, shaping territorial boundaries, social order, and cultural memory. Campaigns required logistics, recruitment, and finance, demonstrating organizational capacity. Castles and fortifications reflected strategic planning and technological adaptation. War impacted civilians through displacement, taxation, and destruction. Victories reinforced legitimacy, while defeat endangered rule. Chronicles shaped narratives of honor, courage, and loss. Conflict revealed ambition and consequence woven into medieval governance. Sieges symbolized endurance, innovation, and desperation in medieval warfare. Attackers deployed battering rams, trebuchets, and mining to breach defenses. Defenders relied on fortifications, supplies, and morale to withstand assault. Starvation, disease, and psychological strain shaped outcomes beyond weapons. Siege warfare required planning and patience, testing leadership. Victory depended on diplomacy as much as force, reflecting political calculation. Sieges illustrated human resilience, ingenuity, and suffering in pursuit of survival or conquest. Military orders blended religious commitment with martial discipline, shaping crusading and frontier defense. Knights adhered to vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, reflecting devotion and control. Orders administered territories, defended pilgrims, and managed resources. Their power generated admiration and suspicion, influencing politics and economy. Suppression or reform reflected shifting alliances and papal authority. Legacy included architectural, legal, and military innovations. Military orders embodied faith and force in medieval identity. Mercenaries altered warfare by offering professional skill, flexibility, and unpredictability. Rulers hired them to supplement feudal levies, bridging gaps in manpower. Their loyalty depended on payment, creating risk and opportunity. Mercenary companies shaped campaigns, influenced negotiations, and challenged authority. Public perception mixed fear and respect toward soldiers motivated by profit rather than allegiance. Their presence reflected military evolution and economic integration. Mercenaries demonstrated tension between tradition and innovation in medieval conflict. Trade routes connected distant regions, facilitating exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies, shaping medieval economies. Merchants journeyed across land and sea, navigating risk and uncertainty to reach lucrative markets. Caravans and convoys offered protection, reflecting cooperation and shared interest. Ports, fairs, and market towns became centers of commerce, influencing urban growth and cultural diversity. Trade encouraged specialization, investment, and innovation, strengthening regional economies. Cultural exchange accompanied material goods, spreading language, religion, and customs. The movement of wealth reshaped social hierarchies and political power. The Silk Road represented a vast network linking East and West through commerce, diplomacy, and cultural contact. Goods such as silk, spices, and precious metals traveled alongside ideas and technologies. Traders interacted with diverse peoples, learning customs, languages, and market practices. Governments sought to control trade routes, imposing taxes and offering protection to encourage commerce. Religion spread along these routes, influencing belief and practice across continents. Trade relationships fostered diplomacy and conflict, reflecting ambition and competition. The Silk Road demonstrated interconnectedness, long before the modern era. Maritime trade expanded through improved shipbuilding, navigation, and port infrastructure, enabling long-distance commerce. Merchant fleets transported heavy cargoes efficiently, enhancing regional and international trade. Naval power protected shipping lanes and asserted political authority. Coastal cities flourished as commercial hubs, reflecting economic opportunity and strategic location. Maritime networks facilitated cultural exchange, migration, and technology transfer. Weather, piracy, and war posed constant threats to commerce. Sea trade transformed economies and societies, emphasizing risk and reward. Guilds structured urban economies by regulating production, training, and trade, ensuring quality and protecting members. Apprenticeship systems conveyed skills and tradition, supporting continuity and innovation. Guilds influenced wages, prices, and working conditions, reflecting economic power. They provided social support through charity, mutual aid, and communal identity. Guild halls served as centers of administration and celebration, reinforcing status. Conflicts with authorities and other guilds shaped urban politics. Guilds blended craftsmanship, commerce, and community in medieval cities. Banking evolved through necessity, facilitating trade, taxation, and governance, laying foundations for modern finance. Moneylenders and merchants managed credit, currency exchange, and investment. Accounting techniques improved record-keeping and economic planning. Financial institutions supported public works, war finance, and charitable foundations. Banking families gained social and political influence through wealth and expertise. Moral debates surrounded lending and profit, reflecting religious and ethical concerns. Banking transformed economic possibility and authority. Economic expansion brought prosperity and inequality, shaping opportunity and conflict across social classes. Wealth concentrated among merchants, nobility, and clergy, while laborers faced fluctuating wages and living conditions. Urban growth created demand for goods and services, enabling entrepreneurship. Rural communities adapted to market integration, altering production and land use. Economic cycles produced boom and hardship, influencing policy and reform. Social mobility increased, but remained constrained by tradition and hierarchy. Economic change revealed ambition, resilience, and disparity in medieval life. Agricultural practices formed the foundation of medieval economies, shaping food production, labor organization, and land management. Open field systems divided land into shared plots, requiring cooperation and negotiation among villagers. Crop rotation improved soil fertility, reflecting experimentation and adaptation. Tools and techniques evolved gradually, increasing efficiency and yield. Weather patterns, disease, and war created uncertainty, influencing harvests and survival. Lords and tenants negotiated obligations and rights, shaping economic relationships. Agriculture determined prosperity, scarcity, and stability across regions. Livestock management complemented crop cultivation, providing meat, dairy, wool, and labor essential to rural life. Herds required grazing land, seasonal movement, and protection from predators and theft. Shepherds and herdsmen developed specialized knowledge, reflecting environmental adaptation. Wool production supported textile industries and trade, linking rural and urban economies. Animals symbolized wealth and status, influencing inheritance and taxation. Disease outbreaks threatened livelihoods, exposing vulnerability. Livestock shaped economic planning and cultural identity. Land tenure defined social and economic relationships through ownership, obligation, and hierarchy. Manorial systems organized labor, rent, and agricultural production, balancing lordship and peasant rights. Customary law governed disputes, reflecting local tradition and negotiation. Land inheritance influenced family structure, stability, and conflict. Enclosure and expansion reshaped common land and social cohesion. Landholding conferred status and responsibility, influencing governance. Tenure reflected power and interdependence in medieval society. Famine represented crisis and consequence, revealing fragility within agricultural and economic systems. Crop failure triggered hunger, disease, and migration, affecting all social classes but especially the poor. Communities developed reserves, charity, and rationing to mitigate hardship. Markets fluctuated dramatically, reflecting scarcity and speculation. Government intervention varied, shaping public trust and stability. Cultural memory preserved trauma through chronicles and tradition. Famine exposed limits of planning and resilience. Technological innovation improved plowing, irrigation, and milling, enhancing productivity and reducing labor. Watermills and windmills transformed grain processing, supporting urban growth and trade. Iron tools improved durability and efficiency, reflecting metallurgical advances. Drainage and reclamation expanded arable land, altering landscapes and settlement patterns. Innovation spread through imitation, adaptation, and investment. Resistance reflected tradition, cost, and uncertainty. Technology shaped possibility within constraint. Environmental change influenced agriculture through climate fluctuation, soil exhaustion, and deforestation. The medieval warm period supported population growth, expansion, and prosperity. Subsequent cooling contributed to harvest failure, famine, and social tension. Human activity altered forests and waterways, impacting resources and biodiversity. Adaptation varied across regions, reflecting knowledge, wealth, and governance. Environmental stress tested resilience and cooperation. Nature shaped and challenged medieval civilization. Craft production supported daily life, trade, and technological development, reflecting specialization and skill within medieval society. Artisans mastered techniques in metalwork, pottery, textiles, and carpentry, contributing to economic and cultural identity. Workshops functioned as centers of apprenticeship, innovation, and family enterprise. Demand for goods stimulated regional variation and stylistic diversity. Craft production required access to raw materials, tools, and markets, linking rural and urban settings. Regulation by guilds ensured quality and protected livelihoods. Craftsmanship revealed creativity, discipline, and social significance. Textile production formed a major component of medieval economies, shaping employment, trade, and domestic labor. Wool and linen dominated European industries, supported by agriculture and livestock management. Spinning, weaving, and dyeing required skill and coordination across households and workshops. Urban centers developed reputations for particular fabrics, influencing reputation and commerce. Trade networks distributed textiles across regions, generating wealth and social mobility. Fashion reflected status, modesty, and cultural exchange. Textiles connected everyday life to broader economic and cultural systems. Metalwork represented technological achievement and practical necessity, shaping tools, weapons, and household goods. Blacksmiths forged iron and steel through skill and endurance, reflecting mastery of heat and material. Metallurgy advanced through experimentation, trade, and warfare, influencing design and performance. Decorative metalwork adorned religious and secular objects, symbolizing authority and devotion. Mining and smelting required organization, labor, and environmental impact. Metal goods circulated through trade, diplomacy, and inheritance. Metalwork embodied utility, artistry, and innovation. Pottery served functional and symbolic roles, supporting storage, cooking, and trade within medieval households. Kilns required resources and expertise, reflecting community and investment. Pottery styles varied across regions, demonstrating local tradition and interaction. Archaeological remains provide insight into diet, trade, and daily life. Decorative motifs expressed identity and belief, linking art and function. Breakage and replacement sustained demand and craftsmanship. Pottery documented continuity and change in material culture. Masonry shaped architecture, infrastructure, and defense through skilled labor and design. Stone construction required quarrying, transport, and coordination, reflecting collective effort. Cathedrals, castles, and bridges demonstrated engineering knowledge and ambition. Masonry guilds protected standards and tradition, fostering training and identity. Techniques evolved with tools and materials, influencing durability and style. Masonry symbolized permanence and authority, shaping landscape and memory. Stonecraft reflected collaboration and legacy. Artisans faced challenges including resource scarcity, market fluctuations, and social hierarchy, influencing opportunity and constraint. Patronage determined demand and innovation, shaping production and livelihood. Competition among workshops encouraged specialization and identity. Regulation protected quality but limited autonomy and experimentation. Training required time and commitment, restricting access and mobility. Craft communities forged networks of support and solidarity. Artisans embodied resilience, skill, and adaptation in medieval economies. Religious institutions shaped cultural identity, governance, and daily life, reflecting belief and authority in medieval society. Churches served as centers of worship, education, and charity, influencing moral and social expectations. Monastic communities preserved knowledge through scholarship, manuscript production, and agricultural innovation. Clergy mediated between the divine and the populace, guiding ritual and doctrine. Pilgrimage connected distant regions, fostering devotion and cultural exchange. Religious institutions accumulated wealth and land, shaping politics and economy. Faith permeated public and private life. Monasticism represented dedication, discipline, and community, shaping spiritual practice and intellectual tradition. Orders developed distinct rules emphasizing prayer, labor, and contemplation. Monasteries contributed to agriculture, education, and healthcare, reflecting service and stewardship. Isolation balanced spiritual focus with practical responsibility. Wealth and influence generated reform and criticism, revealing tension within devotion. Monastic scholars preserved classical texts, shaping cultural continuity. Monastic life blended faith, labor, and learning. The clergy exerted authority through preaching, administration, and ritual, shaping belief and behavior. Bishops managed dioceses, mediating between local communities and higher ecclesiastical authority. Priests guided parish life, performing sacraments and offering counsel. Canon law structured governance, discipline, and doctrine, reflecting institutional power. Disputes over jurisdiction revealed tension between secular and ecclesiastical authority. The clergy influenced culture through education, preservation, and patronage. Religious leadership carried responsibility, privilege, and scrutiny. Pilgrimage reflected devotion, hope, and penance, shaping mobility and cultural encounter. Shrines attracted travelers seeking miracles, intercession, or spiritual renewal. Routes connected urban and rural regions, supporting infrastructure and hospitality. Pilgrims encountered diverse beliefs, languages, and customs, broadening perspective. Pilgrimage stimulated local economies through trade and charity. Risk and hardship tested resilience and faith. Pilgrimage embodied aspiration and endurance. Religious art communicated doctrine and devotion through architecture, sculpture, and illumination. Cathedrals symbolized divine presence and communal ambition, blending engineering and spirituality. Stained glass narrated scripture and history for illiterate audiences. Iconography conveyed meaning through color, gesture, and symbolism. Patronage reflected wealth, authority, and piety, shaping artistic production. Religious art preserved cultural memory and inspired contemplation. Creativity served faith and identity. Religious conflict revealed competing visions of doctrine, authority, and reform, shaping politics and society. Heresy challenged orthodoxy, provoking debate, persecution, and transformation. Crusades pursued spiritual and political goals, reflecting zeal and ambition. Schisms divided institutions, weakening unity and authority. Reform movements sought renewal, responding to corruption and disillusionment. Religious conflict provoked suffering and change. Medieval faith encompassed devotion, power, and dissent. Education shaped intellectual development, social mobility, and governance, reflecting aspiration and institutional authority in medieval life. Cathedral schools offered instruction in grammar, logic, and rhetoric, preparing clergy and administrators. Universities emerged as centers of scholarship, debate, and credentialing, formalizing academic communities. Curriculum emphasized classical texts, theology, and law, reflecting continuity and adaptation. Patronage supported scholars and institutions, influencing access and direction. Literacy expanded among clergy, merchants, and officials, though unevenly. Education linked knowledge to power and opportunity. Universities structured learning through faculties, degrees, and disputation, shaping academic identity and discipline. Students formed associations for housing, protection, and representation. Professors guided inquiry through lectures and commentary, preserving and interpreting authoritative texts. Academic freedom coexisted with ecclesiastical oversight, reflecting negotiation between inquiry and orthodoxy. Universities attracted international scholars, fostering cultural exchange and intellectual networks. Conflict over curriculum, funding, and jurisdiction revealed tension within institutional growth. Universities institutionalized scholarship and professionalization. Scholasticism sought to reconcile reason and faith, shaping theological and philosophical inquiry. Thinkers engaged classical and religious texts, applying logic to doctrinal questions. Debate encouraged precision, analysis, and synthesis, advancing intellectual rigor. Critics challenged abstraction and complexity, advocating clarity and devotion. Scholasticism influenced law, science, and ethics, reflecting broad application. Its legacy persisted through commentary, pedagogy, and institutional memory. Scholastic thought blended rational method with spiritual commitment. Manuscript culture preserved knowledge through labor-intensive production, reflecting artistry and devotion. Scribes copied texts by hand, ensuring preservation and transmission. Illuminators enhanced manuscripts with imagery, symbolism, and aesthetic value. Scriptoria organized production, training, and resource management. Manuscripts shaped literacy, learning, and authority, serving religious and secular institutions. Scarcity elevated value and shaped access to knowledge. Manuscript production reflected tradition, skill, and cultural continuity. Libraries accumulated and safeguarded texts, reflecting ambition and stewardship. Collections included theology, law, science, and literature, shaping intellectual horizons. Cataloging and organization supported preservation and retrieval. Access varied, reflecting hierarchy, privilege, and purpose. Donations and acquisitions expanded resources, shaping reputation and influence. Loss through war, fire, and neglect revealed vulnerability. Libraries symbolized memory, identity, and aspiration. Scientific inquiry advanced through observation, translation, and adaptation, shaping understanding of nature and the human body. Scholars studied astronomy, medicine, and mathematics, building on classical and Islamic knowledge. Experimentation coexisted with tradition, reflecting curiosity and caution. Medical theory informed treatment, public health, and anatomy, though limited by technology. Astronomical models guided navigation, agriculture, and calendar reform. Translators bridged cultures, transmitting ideas across language and geography. Science reflected inquiry within constraint. Law structured relationships, obligations, and authority, shaping justice and governance in medieval society. Customary law reflected local tradition, negotiation, and memory, guiding dispute resolution. Written codes emerged to standardize procedure and reinforce authority. Courts adjudicated conflict over land, inheritance, and crime, balancing evidence, reputation, and precedent. Punishment reflected severity, intent, and social status, demonstrating hierarchy and deterrence. Legal professionals facilitated administration through expertise and interpretation. Law embodied power, order, and adaptation. Customary law varied across regions, reflecting environmental, cultural, and historical difference. Oral tradition preserved precedent, relying on testimony and communal memory. Arbitration and mediation resolved disputes without violence, emphasizing reconciliation. Custom adapted as communities confronted new challenges, balancing continuity and change. Lords and councils influenced decisions, shaping justice and authority. Documentation increased predictability and accountability. Customary law revealed negotiation and resilience. Royal law asserted centralized authority, standardizing justice across territories. Monarchs issued charters, reforms, and decrees, seeking uniformity and legitimacy. Royal courts expanded jurisdiction, challenging local autonomy. Legal officials administered taxation, criminal justice, and land tenure, reinforcing governance. Appeals reflected dissatisfaction, privilege, and political strategy. Centralization shaped national identity and state formation. Royal law reflected ambition, consolidation, and conflict. Canon law governed ecclesiastical life, shaping ritual, discipline, and doctrine. Clerical courts adjudicated marriage, inheritance, and morality, reflecting spiritual authority. Papal and conciliar decisions influenced belief, governance, and reform. Canon lawyers developed sophisticated systems of interpretation, reflecting intellectual rigor. Jurisdictional disputes with secular power exposed tension and negotiation. Canon law shaped education and administration through training and precedent. Ecclesiastical law embodied discipline, authority, and adaptation. Legal procedure balanced evidence, testimony, and ritual, reflecting resources and belief. Ordeal, oath, and compurgation aimed to resolve uncertainty within communal frameworks. Witnesses shaped outcomes through credibility and reputation. Documentation increased accuracy and accountability, though limited by access. Punishment ranged from fines to imprisonment, reflecting offense and circumstance. Public penalties reinforced deterrence and authority. Procedure demonstrated complexity beyond stereotype. Legal transformation reflected social, economic, and political change, shaping institutions and expectations. Expansion of written law increased clarity and consistency. Professionalization created legal careers, linking knowledge and influence. Reform addressed corruption, inequality, and inefficiency. Conflict revealed resistance, privilege, and negotiation. Law evolved within constraint, responding to need and ambition. Medieval justice embodied continuity and change. Medicine addressed illness, injury, and public health, reflecting knowledge, belief, and limitation in medieval society. Physicians studied classical texts, humoral theory, and case observation to guide treatment. Herbal remedies, diet, and surgery formed core therapeutic practices. Hospitals provided care for the sick, poor, and elderly, reflecting charity and community. Disease shaped demography, economy, and psychology, testing resilience and understanding. Medical education varied across regions, influencing skill and access. Medicine balanced inquiry, tradition, and compassion. Humoral theory dominated diagnosis and treatment, emphasizing balance among bodily fluids and environmental factors. Physicians assessed symptoms through pulse, urine, and complexion, reflecting observation and interpretation. Treatment aimed to restore equilibrium through diet, bloodletting, and purgation. Critics questioned efficacy and complexity, advocating practical remedies and experience. Environmental and emotional factors influenced health, shaping holistic approaches. Humoral theory persisted through institutional authority and perceived coherence. Its legacy shaped medical thought beyond the medieval period. Surgery addressed trauma, infection, and deformity through skill and necessity, reflecting courage and risk. Surgeons trained through apprenticeship, emphasizing practical experience over theory. Tools and techniques evolved through experimentation and conflict, improving outcomes. Pain management relied on herbs, alcohol, and restraint, limiting intervention. Amputation, cautery, and wound treatment tested knowledge and endurance. Social status distinguished surgeons from physicians, reflecting hierarchy. Surgical practice revealed adaptation within constraint. Public health measures addressed sanitation, disease prevention, and communal welfare, reflecting awareness and resource limitation. Urban authorities regulated waste disposal, water access, and market hygiene. Quarantine and isolation mitigated epidemics, demonstrating precaution and fear. Religious and charitable institutions provided shelter and care during crisis. Environmental and social factors influenced disease spread and vulnerability. Public health varied with wealth, governance, and infrastructure. Community and policy shaped resilience. Plague revealed vulnerability and response, reshaping demography, economy, and culture. Mortality rates devastated populations, altering labor, inheritance, and land use. Psychological impact included fear, grief, and religious questioning. Public and private responses ranged from flight to charity, reflecting desperation and duty. Social mobility shifted as labor scarcity increased bargaining power. Cultural expression memorialized trauma through narrative and ritual. Plague exposed fragility and transformation. Medical exchange transmitted knowledge across cultures, shaping practice and innovation. Translations from Arabic and Greek expanded access to classical and contemporary scholarship. Trade networks facilitated exchange of remedies, tools, and techniques. Debate encouraged adaptation and refinement, though constrained by authority. Religious and political conflict influenced acceptance and rejection. Cross-cultural exchange broadened possibility within limitation. Medieval medicine reflected global interaction and shared inquiry. Law defined authority, obligation, and justice in medieval society, shaping conflict resolution and social order. Legal systems varied across regions, blending customary practice, royal decree, and religious doctrine. Courts provided frameworks for dispute settlement, reinforcing hierarchy. Trial methods included oath, witness testimony, and ordeal, reflecting belief and uncertainty. Criminal punishment aimed to deter, punish, and restore community balance. Civil law governed property, marriage, and inheritance, reflecting economic and familial structure. Law represented power, legitimacy, and control. Royal authority influenced legal development, centralizing enforcement and standardizing procedure. Kings issued charters and decrees, expanding jurisdiction over nobles and towns. Royal courts challenged feudal privilege, asserting sovereignty. Bureaucracy and record-keeping strengthened consistency and accountability. Legal reforms reflected political ambition and administrative necessity. Centralization created conflict, negotiation, and compromise. Royal law shaped national identity and governance. Church law asserted spiritual and moral authority, governing clergy, marriage, and doctrine. Ecclesiastical courts adjudicated cases involving morality, heresy, and clerical conduct. Conflict between church and state reflected overlapping jurisdiction and competing sovereignty. Canon law influenced education, administration, and international diplomacy. Enforcement varied across regions, reflecting tolerance, coercion, and negotiation. Church law shaped belief, behavior, and legitimacy. Religion and governance intersected. Customary law preserved local identity and tradition, reflecting community memory and adaptation. Oral transmission shaped consistency and variation across regions. Village assemblies mediated disputes through negotiation and precedent. Custom regulated land use, inheritance, and obligation, reflecting economic need. Social pressure enforced compliance, supplementing formal authority. Customary law persisted through practicality and familiarity. Tradition shaped resilience and continuity. Punishment reflected crime severity, social status, and community values, demonstrating justice and control. Penalties ranged from fines and exile to corporal punishment and execution. Public punishment reinforced deterrence and authority through spectacle. Rehabilitation and mercy appeared in pardons and commutations, reflecting negotiation and influence. Punishment shaped fear, obedience, and resentment. Judicial error and bias exposed vulnerability and injustice. Law balanced ideal and reality. Legal transformation emerged through conflict, reform, and necessity, shaping modern systems. Codification standardized practice, improving accessibility and consistency. Professionalization raised expertise and credibility. Expansion of royal authority reduced localized autonomy and feudal privilege. Influence of Roman and canon law shaped intellectual and procedural development. Legal evolution reflected social, economic, and political change. Medieval law laid foundations for modern jurisprudence. Education shaped intellectual development, social mobility, and cultural transmission in medieval society. Learning environments ranged from monastic schools to emerging universities, reflecting institutional diversity. Literacy expanded through religious instruction, administrative need, and commercial activity. Curriculum emphasized theology, language, and classical texts, reinforcing continuity and authority. Access varied by class and gender, limiting participation while reinforcing hierarchy. Education fostered debate, preservation, and adaptation of knowledge. Intellectual life reflected tradition and transformation. Monastic schools preserved classical works, trained clergy, and provided foundational literacy. Scriptoria copied manuscripts, ensuring survival of religious and secular texts. Routine emphasized discipline, contemplation, and study, shaping intellectual formation. Instruction focused on grammar, rhetoric, and theology, reflecting priorities. Monastic education supported administration, diplomacy, and record-keeping, strengthening institutional capacity. Preservation efforts maintained cultural heritage amid conflict and instability. Monastic schooling anchored continuity. Cathedral schools expanded access and curriculum, training clergy and administrators for growing bureaucratic needs. Instruction developed rhetorical skill, logical reasoning, and theological argument. Teachers employed lecture, debate, and commentary, shaping analytical methods. Urban settings fostered exchange of ideas, diversifying influence. Patronage supported scholars and encouraged institutional growth. Cathedral schools bridged religious and secular needs. They laid groundwork for universities. Universities institutionalized higher learning, standardizing curriculum and degree systems. Students studied liberal arts, law, medicine, and theology, reflecting societal needs. Debate and disputation shaped argumentation and inquiry. Academic communities developed administrative structures, governance, and privileges. Intellectual exchange crossed borders through scholars, manuscripts, and correspondence. Universities legitimized expertise and authority. They shaped professional and institutional development. Education influenced social roles, economic opportunity, and cultural expectation. Literacy supported trade, administration, and legal practice. Clergy and scholars occupied influential positions, reinforcing hierarchy. Skilled laborers benefited from reading and accounting, improving mobility. Educational access reflected inequality but enabled selective advancement. Knowledge shaped aspiration and identity. Education defined privilege and possibility. Intellectual exchange fostered translation, commentary, and synthesis across cultures. Contact with Islamic scholarship expanded science, philosophy, and mathematics. Classical texts re-entered Europe through trade and conquest, reshaping thought. Debate integrated faith, reason, and observation, influencing interpretation. Translation movements reflected curiosity and complexity. Intellectual encounter challenged isolation and dogma. Medieval education contributed to enduring cultural and scientific development. Agriculture shaped survival, economy, and social organization in medieval society, determining prosperity and vulnerability. Farming methods balanced tradition, innovation, and resource limitation. Crop rotation, plowing, and animal husbandry improved productivity over time. Seasonal patterns dictated labor, diet, and community rhythm. Weather, soil, and disease influenced yield, scarcity, and resilience. Agricultural success supported population growth and urban expansion. Land determined power and obligation. Manorial systems structured land use, labor obligation, and social hierarchy. Lords controlled estates, extracting rents, dues, and services from peasants. Serfs and tenants cultivated land in exchange for protection and subsistence. Common fields supported shared grazing and cultivation, reflecting cooperation and necessity. Manor courts regulated dispute resolution and communal responsibility. Surplus production supported trade, taxation, and military campaigns. The manor defined rural life and authority. Technological innovation improved efficiency, expanding agricultural possibility. Heavy plow, horse collar, and watermill increased productivity and reduced labor. Tools and techniques spread through trade, migration, and conflict. Innovation depended on investment, knowledge, and collective effort. Improved food production supported population resilience and specialization. Technology shaped adaptation and progress. Agricultural change influenced demographic and economic transformation. Climate influenced harvest, threat, and opportunity, shaping stability and crisis. Warm periods supported expansion, settlement, and surplus. Cold periods triggered famine, migration, and mortality. Weather variability tested planning, resource management, and social cohesion. Communities adapted through storage, diversification, and cooperation. Climate shaped vulnerability and endurance. Environmental change influenced social and political response. Rural communities organized work, ceremony, and identity around agriculture, shaping culture and cohesion. Labor cycles structured festivals, customs, and expectations. Family and kinship networks supported survival and continuity. Cooperation and conflict reflected resource distribution and obligation. Rituals sought divine favor for harvest and protection. Agricultural life balanced hardship and resilience. Community shaped adaptation and belonging. Trade connected rural production to urban markets, shaping wealth and interaction. Surplus enabled exchange, taxation, and specialization. Towns relied on countryside for food supply and raw materials. Market institutions developed rules, standards, and networks. Profit and scarcity influenced conflict and opportunity. Agriculture linked household subsistence to broader economic systems. Medieval farming shaped development, dependence, and transformation. Trade linked regions, facilitated exchange, and shaped economic development in medieval society. Markets and fairs provided spaces for buying, selling, and negotiation. Merchants connected rural production to urban demand, enabling specialization. Overland and maritime routes carried goods, ideas, and people across vast distances. Currency, credit, and accounting supported complex transactions. Trade influenced wealth distribution, social mobility, and political power. Commerce shaped interaction and dependency. Urban centers emerged as commercial hubs, supporting craft production and distribution. Guilds regulated trade, apprenticeship, and quality, shaping profession and identity. Infrastructure such as bridges, roads, and ports facilitated movement and storage. Market regulations enforced standards and protected consumers. Urban growth attracted migrants seeking opportunity and security. Wealth and poverty coexisted within expanding cities. Trade reshaped urban landscape and hierarchy. Long-distance trade connected Europe to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, expanding horizon and possibility. Caravans transported spices, textiles, and precious metals across deserts and mountains. Maritime fleets navigated Mediterranean and Atlantic waters, facing risk and reward. Cultural exchange accompanied commerce, influencing language, art, and science. Religious and political conflict affected trade routes and security. Demand shaped innovation and exploration. Trade reflected ambition, danger, and reciprocity. Merchant culture shaped identity, aspiration, and social transformation. Successful traders accumulated wealth and influence, challenging traditional hierarchies. Education and literacy supported negotiation, accounting, and correspondence. Family partnerships and alliances strengthened commercial networks. Risk management through insurance and diversification reduced vulnerability. Merchant success depended on skill, trust, and reputation. Commerce created new elites and opportunities. Economic policy influenced trade, taxation, and state revenue, reflecting authority and ambition. Tariffs funded military campaigns and infrastructure. Monetary reform sought stability and confidence in currency. Diplomatic agreements protected merchants and secured access to routes and ports. Conflict disrupted commerce, prompting adaptation and negotiation. Economic policy balanced competition and cooperation. Trade shaped governance and strategy. Trade expansion influenced social change, cultural encounter, and technological development. Exposure to foreign goods stimulated desire and adaptation. Navigation, shipbuilding, and mapping advanced through commercial need. Trade contributed to urbanization, professionalization, and institutional complexity. Economic opportunity challenged rigid hierarchy, enabling selective mobility. Commerce linked local communities to global networks. Medieval trade revealed connection, transformation, and interdependence. Trade routes did not simply connect distant markets. They transformed the very rhythm of medieval life by creating new expectations for wealth, access, and cultural encounter across regions previously isolated by geography and politics. Merchants navigated rivers, mountain passes, and coastal waters, relying on seasonal winds, negotiated tolls, and evolving technologies that gradually reduced risk. Spices, textiles, metals, and agricultural goods moved alongside stories, beliefs, and techniques that subtly reshaped local customs and economic priorities. The presence of foreign goods in small villages or bustling towns symbolized aspiration and cosmopolitan identity, even for those without direct contact with distant lands. Maritime republics and trade confederations exerted influence beyond their borders through treaties, credit networks, and naval power, demonstrating how commerce could rival military force. Scarcity, competition, and opportunity converged, making trade both a unifier and a source of tension among states and social groups. Commerce became a lens through which ambition, vulnerability, and cooperation were measured. Urban markets evolved into sophisticated commercial ecosystems, where regulation, specialization, and competition intertwined with civic identity and economic survival. Guilds enforced standards that protected quality and reputation, but also restricted entry and innovation, illustrating the balance between stability and opportunity. Infrastructure investments such as docks, warehouses, and fortified roads signaled the importance of trade as both municipal pride and strategic necessity. Wealth transformed social structures, allowing merchants to challenge aristocratic privilege while relying on alliances with ruling elites for protection and legitimacy. Poverty coexisted with prosperity, as overcrowding, disease, and inequity grew alongside economic expansion. Urban authorities sought to manage this complexity through taxation, policing, and ordinance, reflecting responsibilities that extended beyond commerce. Cities became engines of cultural exchange, political rivalry, and social transformation. Long-distance trade confronted constant uncertainty, as weather, piracy, political instability, and fluctuating demand created hazards and opportunities in equal measure. Caravans and fleets required coordination, capital, and trust, forming networks that spanned continents and relied on shared risk. Diplomatic agreements and commercial privileges served as tools of negotiation, blending economic ambition with political calculation. Cultural contact through trade exposed regions to new technologies, religious practices, and intellectual traditions, challenging insularity. Yet these interactions could provoke suspicion, conflict, or cultural anxiety when unfamiliar goods and ideas disrupted established norms. The rewards of long-distance commerce drove states and individuals to invest in exploration and innovation, gradually expanding geographic knowledge. Trade became a force that reshaped perception as much as it altered material life. Merchant identity developed around skills, relationships, and reputation, creating a distinct social class positioned between traditional nobility and laboring populations. Calculation literacy and negotiation elevated merchants into roles requiring intellectual discipline, not merely physical travel. Partnerships and family networks extended commercial reach, spreading risk while reinforcing loyalty and continuity across generations. Success could yield wealth and influence, yet failure carried severe consequences, from debt to ruin, highlighting the precarious nature of economic ambition. Competition fostered innovation in transport, accounting, and credit systems that would later underpin modern capitalism. Merchants navigated social prejudice and legal barriers, seeking legitimacy through philanthropy, civic service, and alliances. Their rise illustrated shifting values in a world where knowledge and risk could rival birthright. Economic policy reflected the evolving relationship between rulers and commerce, as taxation, currency reform, and trade regulation became instruments of statecraft. Monarchs and councils viewed trade as a source of revenue, leverage, and prestige, shaping policy around opportunity and constraint. Coinage reform aimed to stabilize confidence and facilitate exchange, though debasement or scarcity could trigger crisis. Tariffs protected domestic production but also risked retaliation and smuggling, revealing the complexity of economic strategy. Diplomatic negotiations secured trade routes and exemptions, transforming merchants into agents of political influence. Conflict, blockade, and conquest demonstrated that trade could provoke war as easily as it promoted peace. Policy decisions shaped prosperity and hardship, binding economy to authority. The expansion of trade altered culture, technology, and social expectation, extending its influence far beyond material exchange. Navigational tools, ship design, and mapping advanced in response to commercial necessity, enabling journeys once deemed impossible. Exposure to foreign goods stimulated desire, imitation, and adaptation, reshaping consumption and symbolic value. Trade contributed to urbanization, professional specialization, and administrative complexity, catalyzing long-term structural change. Social mobility became attainable for some, challenging rigid hierarchy while deepening inequality for others left outside economic opportunity. Cultural exchange broadened intellectual horizons, introducing new philosophies, sciences, and artistic forms into medieval life. Trade demonstrated how interconnected forces could reshape society through gradual yet profound transformation. Warfare shaped political authority, territorial ambition, and social expectation in medieval society, reflecting both the brutality of conflict and the strategic thinking that guided rulers. Armies consisted of knights, infantry, and archers, supported by craftsmen, engineers, and supply networks that maintained campaign momentum. Siege warfare became dominant, as fortified towns and castles resisted assault and demanded engineering innovation. Logistics, rather than battlefield heroism, often determined victory, as armies struggled with shortages, disease, and communication. Warfare disrupted agriculture, trade, and population stability, inflicting long-term consequences on communities far from battlefields. Ideology, religion, and honor justified conflict while masking economic and political motives. War revealed ambition, vulnerability, and transformation. Knighthood symbolized status, discipline, and martial obligation, shaping medieval identity through ritual, training, and social expectation. Codes of chivalry blended idealism with practicality, promoting courage, loyalty, and restraint while often failing to prevent brutality in practice. Knights relied on expensive equipment, horses, and retainers, reflecting wealth and hierarchy rather than simple valor. Heraldry and ceremony reinforced legitimacy and lineage, elevating warfare into spectacle and symbolism. Yet knighthood evolved as infantry tactics and new weapons challenged cavalry dominance. Professional soldiers, mercenaries, and militias complicated ideals of aristocratic warfare. The knight remained symbol and participant in a changing military world. Weapons and technology reshaped battlefield dynamics, challenging tradition and accelerating transformation. The longbow, crossbow, and pike altered tactics, undermining cavalry supremacy and introducing lethal range and discipline. Gunpowder weapons emerged gradually, provoking fear, skepticism, and adaptation as fortifications and strategy evolved. Engineering advancements improved siegecraft, enabling tunnels, trebuchets, and artillery to breach defenses once considered impregnable. Military innovations spread through imitation, espionage, and experience, accelerating change beyond regional boundaries. Technology influenced authority by empowering rulers with centralized firepower. The balance between tradition and innovation defined medieval warfare's trajectory. Warfare imposed profound human costs, affecting soldiers, civilians, and captives whose lives were shaped by violence, displacement, and trauma. Campaigns destroyed crops, homes, and livelihoods, leaving famine and disease in their wake, often causing more death than battle itself. Captured populations faced ransom, slavery, or forced service, revealing the intersection of war with economy and exploitation. Trauma influenced cultural memory through chronicles, songs, and memorials that attempted to give meaning to loss. Social obligation compelled service, while fear and necessity forced compliance among those without choice. Human suffering exposed the gap between chivalric rhetoric and lived reality. War inflicted scars on generations. State formation and warfare developed together as rulers leveraged military success to consolidate power and legitimacy. Taxation, administration, and centralized authority expanded to support standing armies and strategic infrastructure. Alliances and diplomacy shaped conflict outcomes as much as battles, revealing the importance of negotiation and perception. Victories enabled rulers to claim divine favor or political destiny, reinforcing authority. Defeat, by contrast, destabilized regimes, invited rebellion, and exposed weakness. Warfare served as catalyst for legal, economic, and administrative change. Military necessity accelerated state building and competition. The legacy of medieval warfare extended beyond conquest, influencing culture, technology, and identity in lasting ways. Chronicles preserved narratives of valor, betrayal, and catastrophe, shaping collective memory and national myth. Technological advancements laid groundwork for early modern military systems, transforming fortification, armament, and logistics. Social change emerged from shifting power dynamics as mercenaries, militias, and centralized forces replaced feudal levies. Trauma and resilience shaped communities long after battles ended, influencing art, religion, and politics. Warfare demonstrated humanity's capacity for innovation and destruction. Its impact persisted beyond medieval borders and centuries. Religion formed the foundation of medieval identity, shaping belief, law, and community through doctrines that promised salvation while regulating social behavior and hierarchy. Churches served as centers of worship, education, and administration, mediating between divine authority and everyday life. Religious festivals structured the calendar, marking agricultural cycles, communal memory, and spiritual obligation. Monastic institutions preserved knowledge, managed estates, and provided charity, reflecting the fusion of faith with economic and political power. Doctrine influenced morality and justice, defining virtue, sin, and punishment, with profound consequences. Religious authority legitimized rulers, resolved disputes, and mobilized populations for war or reform. Faith permeated public and private experience, anchoring meaning and order. Clergy wielded influence through literacy, ritual expertise, and doctrinal training, shaping interpretation and governance. Bishops and abbots managed wealth, property, and jurisdiction, rivaling secular elites in authority. Parish priests served as intermediaries between institutional power and local communities, officiating rites that marked birth, marriage, and death. Monks and nuns pursued contemplative life, emphasizing discipline, labor, and scholarship while shaping cultural preservation. Tensions emerged between spiritual ideals and institutional ambition, exposing corruption, conflict, and reform. Heresy challenged orthodoxy, provoking repression and debate that revealed anxiety over authority and dissent. Clerical power reflected complexity rather than uniform virtue. Pilgrimage embodied devotion, curiosity, and social interaction, transforming faith into physical journey across landscapes of relics, shrines, and hardship. Pilgrims sought healing, forgiveness, or fulfillment, navigating danger, hospitality, and commercial opportunity along established routes. Pilgrimage contributed to economic growth through trade, accommodation, and infrastructure, linking spiritual aspiration to material development. Encounters between diverse travelers facilitated cultural exchange and broadened horizons beyond regional boundaries. Relics served as focal points of belief and skepticism, symbolizing divine presence and contested authenticity. Pilgrimage heightened awareness of sacred geography, reinforcing collective memory and identity. Faith manifested through movement, encounter, and endurance. Monastic reform movements sought to purify religious practice, challenge corruption, and restore spiritual discipline in response to perceived decline. Reformers emphasized poverty, humility, and dedication, resisting wealth and political entanglement that compromised moral authority. Institutional resistance exposed competing visions of faith, revealing tension between autonomy and hierarchy. New orders emerged, adapting ascetic ideals to urban contexts and expanding social engagement through teaching, care, and mission. Reform movements inspired devotion and controversy, reshaping authority and expectation. Conflict between innovation and tradition demonstrated religion's dynamic and contested nature. Reform reflected aspiration and anxiety within faith. Religious art and architecture expressed belief, power, and communal identity, transforming faith into visual and spatial experience. Cathedrals symbolized divine grandeur and civic pride, employing engineering innovation to evoke awe and transcendence. Iconography educated populations through narrative, symbolism, and moral instruction, reinforcing doctrine through imagery. Craftsmanship reflected collaboration among artisans, patrons, and clergy, blending art with labor and devotion. Sacred spaces structured ritual, contemplation, and hierarchy, guiding behavior and emotion. Architecture linked material achievement to spiritual ambition, revealing the interplay of faith and technology. Religious art shaped imagination and memory. Religion influenced diplomacy, war, and law, shaping alliances, conflicts, and legitimacy across political boundaries. Crusades mobilized belief and ambition, illustrating how faith could justify conquest and cooperation while provoking lasting division. Ecclesiastical courts regulated marriage, inheritance, and morality, intersecting spiritual authority with legal control. Excommunication and interdict served as political weapons, enforcing obedience through spiritual threat. Religion provided frameworks for peace negotiation and conflict resolution, demonstrating dual capacity for unity and division. Its legacy endured through institutions, traditions, and cultural memory. Medieval religion shaped power, conscience, and community. Art expressed devotion, identity, and social aspiration in medieval society, transforming belief and power into visual forms that shaped collective memory. Churches commissioned frescoes, mosaics, and sculptures to instruct, inspire, and assert authority, blending aesthetics with doctrine. Manuscript illumination elevated text into sacred object, merging literacy with craftsmanship and reinforcing prestige. Patronage linked artists to clergy, nobles, and merchants, reflecting alliances that shaped artistic direction and opportunity. Artistic production relied on guilds, workshops, and apprenticeship, emphasizing communal skill rather than individual celebrity. Symbolism and narrative conveyed moral lessons, political messages, and spiritual themes. Art became a medium through which values, conflict, and ambition were negotiated. Architecture demonstrated engineering innovation and religious ambition, using stone, timber, and glass to create spaces that embodied transcendence and civic pride. Romanesque structures emphasized mass stability and authority, reflecting continuity and security. Gothic architecture introduced verticality, light, and ornament, transforming sacred experience through scale and luminosity. Cathedral construction required labor, planning, and wealth, engaging entire communities across decades or generations. Architectural style reflected regional identity and competition, as cities sought prestige through monumental achievement. Structural innovation revealed mastery of geometry, material, and design. Architecture linked faith, power, and technology. Sculpture communicated narrative and emotion through material, composition, and placement, serving both devotional and commemorative function. Portal reliefs depicted biblical scenes, saints, and moral allegories, educating populations with limited literacy. Tomb effigies memorialized status, lineage, and virtue, preserving identity beyond death. Naturalism increased over time, reflecting observation and shifting aesthetic priorities. Sculpture integrated with architecture to frame space, ceremony, and hierarchy. Patronage determined subject, scale, and prominence. Sculpture balanced representation, symbolism, and authority. Painting navigated the boundaries of realism, symbolism, and devotion, creating visual narratives that shaped imagination and emotion. Frescoes adorned church walls, illustrating sacred story and instructing audiences about sin, redemption, and community. Panel paintings reflected portable devotion, enabling personal piety beyond institutional settings. Color, composition, and gesture conveyed meaning accessible across literacy boundaries. Artistic technique evolved through experimentation, exposure to foreign influence, and patron demand. Debate arose over representation, iconoclasm, and authenticity, revealing tension within belief and aesthetic expression. Painting expressed continuity, conflict, and change. Craft production fostered skill, economy, and identity, shaping daily life beyond monumental art. Metalwork created reliquaries, armor, and household objects, blending function with ornament. Textiles displayed status and trade networks through material, pattern, and dye. Ceramics and glassware reflected utility and artistry, supporting domestic, commercial, and liturgical use. Demand for luxury goods stimulated trade, innovation, and competition, linking artisans to global networks. Guilds regulated training, quality, and market access, protecting livelihood and tradition. Craft shaped culture through utility and symbolism. Art shaped memory, ritual, and aspiration, influencing perception of the sacred, the powerful, and the ordinary. Imagery preserved narratives that defined identity and legitimacy, making history visible and persuasive. Innovation and tradition coexisted, reflecting negotiation between continuity and change. Artistic exchange transmitted techniques and motifs across cultures through trade, conflict, and pilgrimage. Art became instrument of persuasion, devotion, and commemoration. Its legacy endured in surviving works and the cultural systems that produced them. Medieval art revealed ambition, belief, and resilience. Literature preserved memory, instruction, and imagination in medieval society, shaping cultural identity through narrative that blended history, morality, and aspiration. Epic poems celebrated lineage, valor, and loyalty, reinforcing social ideals while acknowledging the fragility of honor and power. Religious texts framed existence through salvation, sin, and redemption, guiding belief and behavior with authority. Chronicles documented events through selective perspective, revealing how memory and propaganda intertwined. Secular literature explored love, conflict, and adventure, reflecting desire, anxiety, and social tension. Oral tradition sustained stories across generations, adapting content to context and audience. Literature served as mirror and instrument of cultural formation. Courtly literature elevated ideals of love, refinement, and virtue, reinforcing social distinction and emotional complexity. Troubadours and poets crafted narratives of longing, loyalty, and conflict, shaping expectations of courtship and honor. While idealistic, these works acknowledged jealousy, betrayal, and impossibility, revealing psychological realism. Patronage influenced themes, tone, and audience, connecting artistic production to hierarchy and ambition. Courtly ideals permeated behavior, fashion, and etiquette, demonstrating literature's power to influence social practice. Critics challenged artificiality, exposing tension between fantasy and reality. Courtly literature revealed aspiration and contradiction. Religious literature shaped devotion, discipline, and doctrine, instructing communities through allegory, sermon, and vision. Hagiographies portrayed saints as models of endurance, charity, and faith, inspiring imitation and reinforcing institutional authority. Mystical writings explored experience beyond ritual, emphasizing personal encounter and spiritual transformation. Didactic texts taught morality, demanding conformity while acknowledging human frailty. Translation expanded access, enabling broader participation in religious culture. Conflict over interpretation revealed anxiety about authority, authenticity, and dissent. Religious literature mediated belief and institution. Historical writing blended observation, memory, and ideology, shaping perception of past and legitimacy of present. Chronicles emphasized rulers, battles, and divine signs, linking political authority to providence. Accuracy varied with agenda, access, and allegiance, revealing selective interpretation. Annals provided concise record, while narrative history offered interpretation and judgment. Propaganda shaped identity, shaping alliances, enmity, and legacy. Skeptical voices questioned myth and exaggeration, advancing critical method. History demonstrated how narrative shapes authority. Folk tales reflected communal values, fears, and humor, preserving culture beyond elite institutions. Stories explain natural phenomena, social customs, and moral lessons through symbolic narrative. Trickster figures challenged hierarchy, revealing tension between order and transgression. Oral transmission allowed adaptation, ensuring relevance across context and audience. Folk tradition preserved regional identity, blending local memory with universal themes. Humor softened hardship, offering catharsis and solidarity. Folk literature revealed resilience within constraint. Translation facilitated intellectual exchange, transmitting ideas across linguistic, cultural, and religious boundaries. Scholars adapted classical, Arabic, and vernacular texts, shaping science, philosophy, and literature. Translation expanded audience, enabling literacy to influence broader society. Conflict over language and authority reflected competing visions of knowledge and power. Exchange stimulated innovation, challenging insularity and dogma. Translation linked local culture to global thought. Medieval literature demonstrated diversity, complexity, and continuity. Education shaped medieval intellectual life by organizing the transmission of knowledge through schools, monasteries, and emerging universities that sought to formalize learning. Instruction emphasized grammar, rhetoric, and logic, cultivating literacy and analytical ability required for law, theology, and governance. Classical texts provided frameworks for argument and observation, while religious doctrine shaped interpretation and authority. Students pursued scholarship to secure careers in administration, clergy, or teaching, demonstrating how education influenced social mobility. Access to learning remained uneven, reinforcing privilege while permitting limited advancement for exceptional individuals. Debate and commentary refined knowledge through critique rather than passive acceptance. Education fostered intellectual discipline that prepared society to confront uncertainty with structured inquiry. Universities institutionalized learning, creating hierarchies of faculty, curriculum, and examination that legitimized expertise and credentialing. Centers such as Paris, Bologna, and Oxford attracted students across regions, forming cosmopolitan networks that expanded intellectual exchange. Curriculum integrated theology, law, medicine, and the arts, reflecting belief in unified knowledge rather than specialization. Degrees granted authority in professional practice, shaping administrative, legal, and medical leadership. Institutional disputes over doctrine and autonomy revealed tension between innovation and orthodoxy. Patronage and politics influenced curriculum, faculty appointments, and intellectual freedom. Universities embodied ambition to reconcile tradition with expanding inquiry. Scholasticism shaped medieval thought by emphasizing systematic reasoning through dialectic, commentary, and synthesis that sought harmony between faith and logic. Philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas engaged classical and Arabic scholarship to address questions of existence, morality, and causation. Debate challenged contradiction, refining doctrine while revealing limits of rational explanation. Engagement with empirical observation remained limited, yet curiosity fostered incremental attention to natural phenomena. Scholastic discipline encouraged precision in argument, influencing law, theology, and emerging science. Preservation of commentary linked generations of scholars, sustaining intellectual continuity. Scholasticism both constrained and stimulated medieval reasoning. Libraries preserved manuscripts, knowledge, and commentary, serving as repositories for preservation, study, and exchange across generations. Monastic scriptoria copied texts with care, ensuring survival of classical, religious, and scientific works. Collections reflected priorities of patrons and institutions, shaping intellectual focus and accessibility. Access to manuscripts determined capacity for learning and innovation, reinforcing authority through control of information. Catalogs and indexing facilitated research, demonstrating growing organizational complexity. Preservation protected knowledge from conflict, climate, and neglect, revealing vulnerability and resilience. Libraries formed infrastructure for intellectual continuity. Scientific thought emerged slowly through observation, speculation, and reinterpretation that challenged purely theological explanations. Natural philosophy sought to explain motion, matter, and causation through reasoned argument rather than myth. Study of astronomy, arithmetic, and geometry supported calendar reform, architecture, and navigation. Curiosity about the natural world expanded through translation of Arabic and classical texts, revealing broader horizons. Experimentation remained limited, yet evidence-based inquiry appeared in medicine, optics, and mechanics. Debate over empirical knowledge revealed tension between tradition and innovation. Scientific thought prepared ground for practical application. Cross-cultural exchange linked education with medicine, law, and technology, enabling adaptation of knowledge for practical needs. Trade and translation introduced new texts from Islamic, Byzantine, and Jewish scholarship, expanding access to anatomy, pharmacology, and mathematical theory. Scholars integrated foreign concepts into curriculum, stimulating debate and innovation. Pilgrimage, diplomacy, and warfare facilitated cultural contact despite conflict and prejudice. Exchange challenged isolation, fostering curiosity and humility. Intellectual networks connected theory to practical fields such as medicine, preparing for institutional transformation. Education bridged cultural knowledge and emerging scientific practice. Medicine extended beyond treatment into social meaning, shaping how medieval communities understood the body, disease, and responsibility in an era defined by uncertainty and limited resources. Physicians employed humoral theory to diagnose imbalance, relying on observation, classical texts, and environmental interpretation to justify intervention. Treatment sought equilibrium through bloodletting, diet, purgation, and rest, reflecting belief in harmony rather than eradication of pathogens. Universities legitimized medical authority by institutionalizing theory, while apprenticeships preserved practical knowledge in surgery and apothecary work. Patients navigated faith, skepticism, and desperation, seeking healing from monasteries, wise women, and itinerant practitioners when formal medicine failed. Epidemics exposed limits of theory and resources, forcing improvisation and challenging confidence in established doctrine. Medical practice revealed ambition, humility, and constraint. Surgery demanded courage, precision, and resilience, confronting pain and mortality with rudimentary tools and evolving technique. Surgeons treated wounds, fractures, and disease through amputation, cautery, and incision, guided by experience rather than comprehensive understanding of infection. Guilds regulated training, equipment, and professional hierarchy, distinguishing surgeons from barbers and physicians while limiting unauthorized practice. War accelerated surgical innovation through necessity, as battlefield injury required rapid adaptation and triage. Pain management relied on herbs, alcohol, and restraint, revealing both compassion and limitation. Surgical success depended on sanitation, climate, and luck, as infection and shock threatened recovery. Surgery illustrated determination within constraint. Public health reflected awareness of sanitation, contagion, and community welfare, even when understanding remained incomplete. Authorities regulated waste disposal, market hygiene, and water access to mitigate disease, balancing practicality with limited infrastructure. Quarantine and isolation demonstrated recognition of contagion, though fear and coercion often accompanied enforcement. Guilds and religious institutions provided charity and care, reflecting obligation alongside belief. Urban growth strained sanitation and governance, making disease a political as well as medical challenge. Epidemics reshaped policy, migration, and trust, reinforcing vulnerability. Public health reflected cooperation, conflict, and necessity. Plague transformed society by exposing fragility in systems of labor, faith, and authority, creating demographic collapse and collective trauma. Mortality destabilized feudal structures as labor scarcity empowered surviving workers to negotiate wages and mobility. Religious responses ranged from penitence and charity to fanaticism and persecution, revealing desperation and moral anxiety. Cultural memory preserved suffering through chronicles, sermons, and ritual, shaping identity across generations. Economic disruption reshaped land use, trade, and inheritance, altering long-term development. Scientific speculation emerged slowly, as observation challenged doctrine yet lacked conceptual framework. Plague revealed collapse and adaptation. Mental and emotional health received limited recognition yet surfaced in accounts of melancholy, possession, and madness, reflecting attempts to explain unseen suffering. Treatments combined prayer, fasting, herbal remedies, and social control, revealing uncertainty and fear. Monasteries provided sanctuary, though confinement and stigma shaped experience as much as compassion. Belief in supernatural influence exposed boundary between medicine and religion, complicating diagnosis and responsibility. Trauma from war, famine, and disease manifested in behavior and narrative, demonstrating psychological consequence. Expressions of humor, ritual, and solidarity served as coping mechanisms. Mental health exposed humanity beneath doctrine. Cross-cultural medical exchange broadened possibility and challenged dogma, introducing new texts, techniques, and theories through trade and translation. Islamic scholarship preserved and expanded classical learning, influencing European anatomy, pharmacy, and diagnosis. Observation of diseases across climates and populations refined understanding, even when interpretation remained speculative. Translation movements connected scholars across boundaries, stimulating debate and adaptation. Resistance emerged from institutional conservatism, yet practice gradually incorporated innovation. Medical exchange demonstrated curiosity, humility, and convergence. Medieval medicine revealed complexity, ambition, and profound limitation. Science in the medieval world developed through observation, preservation and cautious inquiry, revealing a gradual shift from inherited authority toward empirical understanding. Natural philosophers studied motion, matter, and celestial bodies through a framework shaped by classical texts, theological constraints, and limited instruments. Experimentation remained tentative but meaningful, as scholars tested optics, mechanics, and astronomy through measured observation rather than speculation alone. Monastic and university scholars debated the relationship between reason and faith, attempting to reconcile empirical findings with theological doctrine. Translation of Greek and Arabic works reintroduced mathematical precision, expanding intellectual horizons beyond inherited assumptions. Innovation emerged slowly, in tension with institutional conservatism, yet demonstrated growing confidence in human interpretation of nature. Medieval science laid foundations for future revolution. Astronomy occupied a central place in scientific thought, blending mathematical calculation with metaphysical meaning to explain motion of stars, planets, and seasons. Scholars relied on observation, geometry, and instruments, such as astrolabes, to chart celestial movement and predict eclipses or calendar dates. The geocentric model reflected inherited authority yet provided coherent explanation within known parameters and observation. Critique emerged as discrepancies accumulated, provoking calculation, debate, and refinement rather than immediate abandonment. Navigation, agriculture, and ritual relied on astronomical knowledge, demonstrating practical value beyond theoretical speculation. Contact with Islamic astronomy introduced new instruments, tables, and commentary, challenging insularity. Astronomy revealed interplay between authority, curiosity, and precision. Alchemy blended experiment, symbolism, and ambition, seeking transformation of metals, purification of substances, and understanding of hidden properties in nature. Practitioners recorded procedures, materials, and results with growing attention to repeatability, even when language remained metaphorical to guard secrecy. Courts and rulers patronized alchemists, hoping for wealth, medicine, or strategic advantage from their discoveries. Frustration with failure coexisted with genuine innovation, as distillation, sublimation, and mineral extraction advanced through experimentation. Critics condemned fraud and mysticism, yet could not ignore practical achievements that influenced metallurgy and pharmacy. Alchemy reflected desire for mastery over nature, constrained by limited conceptual models. It demonstrated ambition that extended beyond superstition. Mathematics advanced through commerce, astronomy, and engineering, providing tools for calculation, measurement, and structure that shaped architecture and navigation. Introduction of Arabic numerals and algebra transformed accounting and record-keeping, replacing cumbersome systems with efficiency. Geometry guided design of cathedrals, bridges, and fortifications, demonstrating application beyond abstraction. Merchants relied on arithmetic for weights, exchange, and credit, linking mathematics to economic development. Translation of Euclid and Arabic commentaries deepened theoretical understanding and precision. Resistance to new numerals revealed cultural anxiety, yet gradual acceptance signaled practicality's triumph. Mathematics connected theory, commerce, and construction. Technology shaped daily life, warfare, and infrastructure, illustrating how incremental innovation could alter capability and expectation. Watermills and windmills increased productivity, reducing labor and expanding manufacturing of grain, cloth, and metal. Mechanical clocks transformed perception of time, structuring labor, ritual, and administration with unprecedented regularity. Agricultural tools, ship design, and mining equipment evolved through observation, necessity, and shared knowledge. Towns invested in bridges, roads, and sanitation systems that facilitated trade and governance. Technology spread unevenly, limited by cost, geography, and resistance to change. Innovation reflected adaptation within constraint. The preservation and transmission of knowledge shaped continuity and transformation, as scribes, scholars, and translators safeguarded texts through conflict and decay. Libraries and scriptoria protected fragile manuscripts, reflecting awareness of intellectual heritage. Universities standardized curriculum, legitimizing commentary and debate as mechanisms of refinement. Cross-cultural encounters introduced novelty and provoked re-evaluation, demonstrating permeability rather than isolation. Tension persisted between reverence for authority and desire to understand the natural world directly. Medieval science did not achieve revolution, but it nurtured foundations for one. Inquiry revealed challenge, perseverance, and gradual transformation. Law and governance shaped medieval order by defining duty, hierarchy, and justice within a world where custom, religion, and royal authority intersected. Kings asserted sovereignty through charters, decrees, and courts, seeking to centralize power while negotiating with nobles, clergy, and towns. Feudal obligations bound vassals to lords through land, military service, and loyalty, reinforcing social stratification while providing protection and structure. Legal disputes reflected conflict over inheritance, property, and rights, demonstrating how law served both personal interest and public stability. Written records increased accountability, yet interpretation often varied by region, status, and influence. Punishment sought deterrence, at times prioritizing spectacle over rehabilitation, revealing belief in justice rooted in fear and authority. Governance balanced ambition with limitation, shaping continuity and unrest. Customary law preserved local identity and adaptation, offering frameworks rooted in memory, precedent, and community rather than centralized decree. Village assemblies mediated disagreements through negotiation, testimony, and oath-taking, emphasizing reconciliation over rigid punishment. Custom governed resource use, inheritance, and marriage, reflecting economic necessity and moral expectation. Oral transmission ensured flexibility but risked inconsistency, particularly when external authority challenged tradition. Social pressure enforced compliance, linking justice to reputation and belonging. Custom persisted where written law failed to account for daily realities and communal ties. The endurance of custom illustrated resilience within constraint. Church law expanded influence beyond spiritual matters, shaping marriage, morality, and clerical discipline through canonized doctrine and ecclesiastical courts. These courts adjudicated disputes involving wills, vows, oaths, and heresy, asserting jurisdiction that sometimes rivaled royal authority. Clerical immunity complicated enforcement, provoking tension between church and state over sovereignty and privilege. Canon law evolved through councils, scholarly commentary, and papal authority, emphasizing uniformity across broad geographic territory. Punishment ranged from penance to excommunication, revealing power rooted in belief and social cohesion as much as coercion. Church law shaped conscience and policy, intertwining doctrine with governance. It revealed how theology and law reinforced one another. Royal courts sought to standardize justice through written precedent, professional judges, and appeals, challenging local autonomy and feudal immunity. Expansion of royal jurisdiction increased revenue, legitimacy, and administrative reach, enabling monarchs to consolidate control. Legal reform introduced juries, documentation, and procedure, reflecting gradual movement toward accountability and rationalization. Conflict emerged where centralization threatened noble privilege or customary tradition, exposing competing visions of justice. Courts shaped public perception of fairness, reinforcing trust or resentment depending on outcome. Legal uniformity strengthened state identity, but also highlighted inequity rooted in class and influence. Royal justice revealed ambition and conflict. Punishment reflected social values, crime severity, and public expectation, blending deterrence, retribution, and symbolic authority. Public executions served spectacle, reinforcing fear and obedience while asserting legitimacy of rulers and law. Corporal punishment, fines, and exile provided alternatives shaped by status, wealth, and social utility. Mercy could be granted through pardon, negotiation, or influence, revealing flexibility within harsh systems. Prisons remained limited, focusing on detention rather than long-term confinement. Punishment exposed inequality, where noble privilege and clerical immunity altered consequence. Justice revealed belief in order through visible suffering. Legal evolution emerged through conflict, reform, and intellectual exchange, laying groundwork for modern judicial systems. Roman and canon law influenced universities, courts, and administration, shaping thought and procedure beyond regional boundaries. Written law expanded access and consistency, though interpretation remained contested. Social change, commerce, and warfare demanded adaptation, challenging static authority. Gradually, law shifted from personal privilege to institutional structure, reflecting broader transformation in power and governance. Legal memory preserved precedent, enabling continuity and critique. Medieval law demonstrated how authority, necessity, and aspiration shaped justice and state. Daily life in medieval society unfolded through routines shaped by labor, belief, and community, revealing a world where survival demanded cooperation and adaptation rather than isolation or independence. Households served as economic units, producing food, clothing, and goods through shared labor among family members and servants. Diet reflected availability and season, relying on bread, grains, vegetables, and occasional meat, demonstrating how class and geography shaped nourishment. Clothing varied by status, with nobles displaying wealth through fabric and color, while commoners prioritized durability and necessity. Domestic space centered on hearth and workshop, blending comfort, work, and ritual within modest or grand dwellings. Community relationships determined support, conflict, and reputation, influencing marriage, inheritance, and responsibility. Daily life balanced hardship with rhythm, tradition, and resilience. Work structured time and identity, defining roles across rural and urban settings through agriculture, craft, and service. Peasants labored in fields from dawn to dusk, coordinating sowing, harvesting, and maintenance with seasonal demands and weather. Artisans honed skills through apprenticeship and guild membership, seeking mastery and livelihood within regulated markets. Women contributed through household management, textile production, and field labor, revealing central roles often minimized in formal records. Children supported family through simple tasks, learning skills and expectations gradually rather than through formal education. Nobles administered estates, pursued military training, and performed ceremonial duties, demonstrating power tied to land and lineage. Work revealed stratification and necessity across class lines. Leisure offered relief and identity, revealing preferences that blended festivity, tradition, and social hierarchy. Religious festivals punctuated the year, offering collective celebration, ritual, and temporary suspension of labor. Games, music, and storytelling fostered community, passing knowledge and memory across generations. Hunting and tournaments displayed noble culture, reinforcing prestige and martial skill while emphasizing spectacle. Taverns provided social space for commoners, enabling exchange, negotiation, and humor beyond formal authority. Holidays reflected shared belief and seasonal rhythm, linking spiritual and agricultural life. Leisure softened hardship and reinforced belonging. Housing and material culture reflected resource availability, climate, and status, shaping living conditions through construction and furnishing. Rural homes used timber, thatch, and earth, prioritizing utility and warmth, while urban dwellings incorporated stone and multiple stories to conserve space. Castles and manor houses symbolized authority and defense, blending domestic life with military architecture. Furnishings were sparse among commoners, emphasizing durability, while elites displayed tapestries, metalwork, and imported goods as symbols of wealth. Sanitation varied widely, contributing to disease and discomfort despite efforts at regulation. Domestic animals shared space with families, illustrating blurred boundaries between work, sustenance, and home. Housing reflected inequality and adaptation. Family and community shaped social expectation, marriage, and inheritance, anchoring identity through duty and cooperation. Marriage served economic and strategic purpose, particularly among elites, though affection and partnership also influenced union. Kinship networks provided security, labor, and reputation, reinforcing community ties and obligation. Childbirth and mortality underscored fragility, making support systems crucial for survival and grief. Elders contributed memory, mediation, and care, maintaining continuity across generations. Conflict within families exposed tension between duty and desire, revealing complexity beneath idealized norms. Family structured belonging and vulnerability. Communication and travel connected communities despite limited infrastructure, demonstrating mobility rather than isolation. Messengers, merchants, and pilgrims carried information, goods, and rumor, linking rural villages to urban centers and distant regions. Roads and bridges facilitated movement, though danger from weather, banditry, or political conflict imposed caution. Hospitality and tolls shaped interaction, revealing economic and social expectations surrounding travel. Markets served as centers of exchange, news, and negotiation, blending commerce with communication. Oral transmission preserved stories, law, and memory, where literacy remained limited. Medieval daily life demonstrated continuity, hardship, and adaptation through shared experience and evolving routine. Food and drink shaped medieval health, economy, and culture, revealing patterns of nourishment that reflected class, climate, and tradition. Bread formed the dietary foundation for most households, with quality and grain type signaling wealth and availability rather than preference alone. Vegetables, legumes, and dairy supplemented diets among peasants, while nobles consumed greater quantities of meat, spices, and imported goods that express status. Preservation methods such as salting, smoking, and drying enabled survival through winter and famine, illustrating ingenuity in response to scarcity. Ale and wine served as primary beverages, offering safer alternatives to water while supporting agriculture and trade. Feasting marked ceremony and hierarchy, displaying generosity and power through abundance and spectacle. Food revealed inequality, adaptation, and cultural identity. Agricultural production determined diet and security, linking nourishment to the rhythms of labor, weather, and infrastructure. Grain harvests shaped prosperity and famine, influencing pricing, migration, and social conflict during scarcity. Livestock provided meat, milk, and labor, balancing nutrition with economic and symbolic value. Fish served as a crucial resource, especially during religious fasting, stimulating preservation techniques and trade networks. Orchards and gardens supported variety, though limited by climate and knowledge, reflecting regional difference. Communities invested in mills and granaries, demonstrating awareness of vulnerability and collective responsibility. Agriculture underscored dependence on environment and cooperation. Market systems influenced availability, quality, and cost, shaping access to goods beyond local production. Urban centers served as hubs for grain, spices, and luxury foods, enabling exchange between regions through merchants and guilds. Regulation attempted to stabilize weights, prices, and safety, though enforcement varied with corruption and resource strain. Imported spices such as pepper and saffron symbolized status and global connection, reinforcing cultural aspiration and economic ambition. Trade linked diets to distant geographies, revealing interconnected tastes and vulnerabilities. Taverns and inns provided communal eating spaces, blending commerce, news, and social interaction. Markets reflected complexity in supply, demand, and identity. Cooking techniques shaped flavor, preservation, and symbolism, demonstrating knowledge constrained by fuel, equipment, and class. Hearths dominated domestic food preparation, influencing architecture, labor division, and daily routine. Stewing and boiling maximized nutrition and economy, while roasting signified wealth through access to meat and specialized equipment. Herbs and spices masked spoilage, enhanced taste, and conveyed prestige, linking cuisine to status and exchange. Cookbooks emerged in elite households, preserving recipes, etiquette, and aspiration while excluding common practice. Religious fasting shaped menus and cooking methods, revealing the intersection of faith and sustenance. Technique reflected adaptation and expression rather than indulgence. Feasting served political, religious, and social roles, transforming nourishment into performance that reinforced hierarchy and allegiance. Banquets celebrated alliances, victories, and ceremonies, using scale and spectacle to assert authority and generosity. Seating arrangements reflected status and influence, making physical placement a marker of power. Dishes displayed wealth through rare ingredients, presentation, and abundance, creating narratives of prestige. Entertainment accompanied feasting, blending music, storytelling, and ceremony into ritual. Yet excess provoked criticism, revealing tension between generosity and waste during hardship. Feasting exposed contrast between celebration and inequality. Food customs conveyed morality, identity, and belief, shaping rules about purity, fasting, and hospitality across communities. Religious doctrine regulated consumption, defining sin and discipline through dietary laws and ritual abstention. Hospitality served as moral obligation, offering nourishment to travelers, neighbors, and the poor, reinforcing communal bonds. Legends and superstitions surrounded certain foods, reflecting attempts to explain health, luck, or status through symbolism. Scarcity shaped memory and imagination, as famine left psychological marks that influenced cultural values. Dietary change accompanied trade, climate, and social transformation, revealing evolving taste and adaptation. Medieval foodways demonstrated survival, aspiration, and meaning embedded in daily sustenance. Medieval clothing was more than practical covering. It was a visual language that communicated status, occupation, faith, and regional identity. Textiles varied dramatically between classes, with peasants wearing coarse wool and linen while nobility displayed silks, velvets, and embroidered garments. Climate influenced fabric choice, compelling layered clothing in colder regions and lighter materials where conditions allowed. Color dyes signified wealth and access to trade, as vibrant hues required imported ingredients and specialized production. Tailoring reflected resources and skill, distinguishing fitted garments among elites from simpler cuts among laborers. Accessories such as belts, brooches, and head coverings further expressed hierarchy and modesty. Clothing served as social code, readable to those who shared its conventions. Production and trade of textiles formed major economic sectors, linking rural labor to urban workshops and international markets. Sheep farming supported wool industries, while flax cultivation produced linen relied upon by most households. Guilds regulated weaving, dyeing, and tailoring, maintaining standards and guarding technical knowledge. Imported fabrics from Italy, Byzantium, and the East demonstrated global networks that reached even into distant European courts. Regional specialties emerged, such as Flemish wool or Italian silk, shaping economic identity and competition. Taxes and laws targeted clothing, reinforcing class boundaries and protecting domestic production. Textiles reflected both industry and inequality. Sumptuary laws attempted to enforce social hierarchy by restricting who could wear specific fabrics, colors, and accessories. Authorities feared that clothing capable of disguising class would disrupt order, enabling social mobility and deception. These regulations reveal anxiety about wealth accumulation outside traditional aristocratic structures, particularly among merchants and rising urban elites. Enforcement varied, with wealthy families often circumventing restrictions through fines or influence. Religious authorities also shaped clothing norms, promoting modesty and condemning excess or vanity. Garments thus became battlegrounds for power, morality, and identity. Laws reflected attempts to stabilize fragile hierarchies. Clothing also held symbolic and ceremonial functions, especially within religious and political contexts where garments served as tools of authority. Clerical robes communicated piety and rank, distinguishing monastic orders, priests, and bishops through color and ornamentation. Coronation garments signified divine sanction and royal dignity, linking rulers to traditions and sacred narratives. Knights' armor bore heraldic symbols, displaying lineage and allegiance in warfare and ceremony. Pilgrims wore badges and simple cloaks, marking devotion and purpose, while penitents donned sackcloth as public proof of repentance. Clothing participated in rituals that expressed power, humility, and transformation. Daily wear revealed labor roles, gender expectations, and practical adaptation to environment and task. Peasant clothing prioritized durability and movement, allowing field labor, household work, and travel. Women's garments balanced modesty with function, reflecting domestic responsibilities and cultural ideals. Children often wore miniature versions of adult clothing, symbolizing early integration into social roles and labor. Seasonal variation influenced materials, with heavier fabrics and layering for winter, and lighter garments for summer activity. Footwear ranged from simple leather soles to ornate shoes, highlighting occupational difference and wealth. Clothing shaped bodily experience and social perception. Innovation in textile technology reshaped medieval fashion, economy, and social structure, demonstrating adaptability and pursuit of efficiency. Spinning wheels and improved looms increased production, while dye techniques expanded available color palettes. Trade routes introduced new fabrics and designs, inspiring imitation, aspiration, and gradual change. Migration and conflict facilitated textile exchange, transferring skills and materials across borders. Climate fluctuations influenced clothing adaptation, driving development of warmer garments during colder periods. Over time, clothing styles shifted toward more fitted forms, reflecting evolving taste and technical skill. Medieval fashion reveals continuity and change woven into identity and survival. Medieval childhood was shaped by expectations of labor, obedience, and survival, rather than romantic notions of innocence that emerged in later centuries. Infants faced high mortality rates due to disease, poor nutrition, and limited medical knowledge, making baptism and spiritual protection urgent priorities for families. Parents balanced affection with practicality, Aware that not all children would survive to adulthood, yet still investing emotionally in their well-being. Education varied by class, with noble children receiving instruction in literacy, etiquette, and estate management, while peasant children learned agricultural and domestic skills through daily participation. Play existed but was closely tied to learning, preparing children for roles within household and community. Apprenticeship marked transition toward adulthood, integrating youth into trade networks and social hierarchies. Childhood reflected vulnerability, responsibility, and expectation rather than sheltered innocence. Family structures shaped childhood experience, with extended kin networks offering support and supervision in rural communities. Mothers and female relatives oversaw early care, while fathers introduced children to labor and social obligations as they matured. Marriage alliances influenced noble children's futures, binding them to political strategy rather than personal choice. Peasant children inherited fewer options, expected to continue family labor or pursue apprenticeships if resources allowed. Emotional bonds existed within these constraints, visible in letters, wills, and memorials that revealed genuine affection. Religious instruction shaped morality and identity, emphasizing obedience, humility, and fear of divine judgment. Childhood was framed within spiritual and social duty. Education varied widely, reflecting inequality in access and purpose across medieval society. Monastic and cathedral schools trained clergy in literacy, theology, and administration, establishing pathways to influence and learning. Universities emerged as centers of higher study, offering instruction in law, medicine, and philosophy to those who could afford attendance. Merchant children increasingly learned numeracy and record-keeping, reflecting economic transformation and urban opportunity. Peasant education remained informal, rooted in practical skill rather than literacy, though parish priests sometimes offered basic instruction. Girls' education emphasized domestic skills, piety, and occasionally literacy within elite households. Education reinforced social hierarchy while enabling limited mobility. Labor defined much of childhood, integrating children into household and community survival from an early age. Rural children tended animals, collected fuel, and assisted with planting and harvests, ensuring continuity of agricultural cycles. Urban children supported family workshops, trade, and domestic service, contributing to economy and craft. Apprenticeships formalized skill transfer, providing structure, discipline, and future livelihood while limiting autonomy. Child labor reflected necessity rather than exploitation in a world where survival depended on collective effort. Seasonal demands shaped routines, intensifying work during harvest and easing during winter months. Childhood labor embodied responsibility and adaptation rather than leisure. Religion shaped children's worldview through ritual, doctrine, and daily practice that linked personal identity to cosmic order. Baptism marked spiritual inclusion and protection, addressing fears of infant mortality and purgatory. Catechism and moral instruction emphasized obedience, charity, and fear of sin, reinforcing social and theological norms. Festivals and feast days offered rare moments of joy and reflection, blending devotion with communal celebration. Saints' lives and miracle tales served as moral exemplars, modeling piety and sacrifice. Children participated in pilgrimages, processions, and charity, integrating them into religious community. Spiritual formation influenced every stage of growth. Despite hardship, evidence reveals tenderness, joy, and aspiration within medieval childhood, complicating perceptions of unrelenting severity. Parents mourned lost children deeply, commissioning memorials, prayers, and charitable acts in their memory. Toys, games, and songs provided emotional connection and cultural continuity, demonstrating creative adaptation within constraint. Folklore and storytelling nurtured imagination, preparing children to navigate uncertainty and adversity. Clothing rituals and celebrations marked milestones, acknowledging growth and transition with symbolic meaning. Yet vulnerability remained constant, shaped by disease, famine, and rigid hierarchy. Medieval childhood embodied fragility, resilience, and transformation. Medieval justice was shaped by custom, community, and authority, blending tradition with emerging legal frameworks that sought to balance order and coercion. Local courts addressed disputes through negotiation, oaths, and arbitration, reflecting communal interests rather than abstract legal principle. Trial by ordeal and compurgation relied on belief in divine judgment, revealing how faith and law intertwined before documentary evidence and professional judges became common. As literacy spread, written charters and legal codes emerged, establishing precedent and centralizing authority in royal and ecclesiastical institutions. Punishments varied widely, from fines and public humiliation to imprisonment or execution, depending on crime, status, and context. Violence served as both deterrent and demonstration of power, illustrating justice as performance and control. Medieval law reflected struggle between tradition and centralization. The Church played a dominant role in legal matters, offering sanctuary, mediation, and moral authority that often rivaled secular courts. Ecclesiastical courts adjudicated marriage, inheritance, and moral offenses, shaping daily life through regulation of behavior and belief. Clergy exercised influence through confession and penance, integrating spiritual discipline into legal consequences. Church law developed intellectual rigor through canonists and theologians, who codified doctrine and procedure. Papal authority clashed with secular rulers, revealing competing visions of sovereignty and jurisdiction. Heresy trials exemplified how law could enforce orthodoxy, shaping religious conformity through fear and persuasion. The Church's legal authority reflected faith, power, and governance. Royal authority increasingly centralized justice, asserting control over courts, punishment, and lawmaking during periods of consolidation and conflict. Monarchs used written law to strengthen legitimacy, replacing local customs with standardized codes that enhanced administrative reach. Sheriffs and royal officials enforced decisions, extending power into rural communities through taxation, inquiry, and military presence. Kings used justice to cement alliances, reward loyalty, and suppress rebellion, demonstrating legal authority as political tool. Legal reforms sought efficiency and uniformity, though resistance persisted among regions defending traditional privilege. Record-keeping expanded, preserving cases and establishing precedent for future disputes. Royal justice reflected ambition, consolidation, and governance. Crime and punishment revealed cultural attitudes toward morality, property, and violence, illustrating how authority defined order and transgression. Theft and treason received severe penalties, reflecting threats to property and sovereignty in a fragile economic system. Public executions served ritual purpose, reinforcing law through spectacle and collective memory. Lesser crimes faced fines or corporal punishment, linking penalty to social and financial status. Jails evolved gradually, shifting from temporary holding to longer-term confinement as legal systems matured. Punishment was not only retribution, but warning and communication to maintain stability. Crime reflected fear, scarcity, and power. Community played crucial roles in enforcing justice, with neighbors providing testimony, rumor, and surveillance in systems reliant on local knowledge. Reputation shaped outcomes, linking personal history to credibility and punishment. Collective responsibility meant communities shared consequences for crime, encouraging vigilance and cooperation. Feuds and vendettas threatened order, prompting arbitration and legal intervention to prevent cycles of retaliation. Honor and shame shaped behavior, embedding law within social expectation. Urbanization increased anonymity, prompting more formal policing and record-keeping. Community remained foundation of justice, even as authority centralized. Legal transformation during the Middle Ages laid foundations for modern law, emphasizing written codes, professional judges, and distinctions between secular and ecclesiastical authority. Universities trained lawyers, integrating Roman law and philosophy into European legal thinking. Commerce demanded contracts, property rights, and dispute resolution, fostering innovation. Gradually, torture and ordeal declined, replaced by inquiry, evidence, and procedure. Law evolved from personal vengeance to institutionalized justice, reflecting changing views of authority and rights. Yet inequalities persisted, with justice often reflecting power rather than fairness. Medieval law revealed evolution toward systems balancing order, authority, and human need. Medieval warfare shaped political power, territorial ambition, and social hierarchy, revealing how conflict drove innovation and identity across regions. Armies reflected feudal structures, with nobles providing mounted knights and peasants serving as infantry or laborers. Castles symbolized authority and defense, transforming landscapes through fortification and control of trade routes and populations. Siege warfare dominated strategy, relying on engineering, starvation, and negotiation rather than constant open battle. Weaponry evolved from swords and spears to crossbows and early gunpowder, highlighting technological adaptation to changing warfare needs. Warfare influenced taxation, infrastructure, and labor, embedding conflict into economic and social systems. Medieval war reflected ambition, necessity, and transformation. Knights embodied ideals of martial skill, loyalty, and honor, though reality often diverged from chivalric literature that glorified combat and morality. Training began early, emphasizing horsemanship, weapon mastery, and discipline, shaping noble identity and social expectation. Tournaments reinforced status and showcased skill, blending entertainment with military preparation and diplomacy. Heraldry allowed recognition on battlefields, linking lineage to reputation and allegiance. Yet knights could be ruthless, driven by plunder, ransom, and political motives rather than chivalry. Ideals of honor conflicted with practical demands of warfare, exposing tension between narrative and reality. Knightly culture reflected power, privilege, and paradox. Siegecraft demanded engineering knowledge, logistics, and patience, shaping warfare strategy and civilian experience in fortified towns. Engineers designed siege towers, trebuchets, and mining operations, adapting tactics to terrain, weather, and fortifications. Defenders used walls, moats, and countermeasures, creating prolonged conflicts that strained resources and morale. Non-combatants suffered starvation, disease, and violence, revealing how war blurred boundaries between military and civilian. Negotiation and ransom frequently resolved sieges, demonstrating pragmatism within martial aggression. Victory could reshape political boundaries, inheritance, and allegiance. Sieges revealed war as endurance and negotiation rather than constant battle. Infantry and archers played critical roles in warfare, challenging knightly dominance through discipline, numbers, and evolving weaponry. Longbows and crossbows enabled common soldiers to defeat heavily armored opponents, reshaping tactics and class assumptions. Mercenaries filled armies during prolonged campaigns, reflecting financial pressures and professionalization. Logistics determined success, requiring food, transport, and coordination across difficult terrain. Disease and weather killed more soldiers than combat, emphasizing vulnerability despite technological adaptation. Training and cohesion distinguished effective forces from conscripted levies. Infantry revealed democratization and complexity within warfare. Gunpowder marked a transformative shift, gradually undermining castle defenses and altering political power through artillery and firearms. Cannons devastated fortifications, forcing architectural innovation and centralized authority capable of funding expensive technology. Firearms changed battlefield dynamics, reducing emphasis on individual combat skill and reshaping recruitment. States invested in permanent armies, standardizing weapons and training as warfare grew more bureaucratic. Resistance to technology reflected tradition, fear, and cost, delaying full transformation until later centuries. Gunpowder symbolized transition from feudal conflict to early modern warfare. War's consequences extended beyond battlefield victory, shaping culture, economy, and collective memory. Veteran reintegration challenged communities, revealing trauma, disability, and shifting identity. War taxes strained economies but also funded infrastructure and administration. Literature and art memorialized battles, heroes, and grievances, shaping national identity and myth. Diplomacy and marriage followed war, binding rivals and consolidating power through negotiated peace. Warfare spurred technological, legal, and administrative innovation. Medieval war demonstrated destruction, adaptation, and lasting influence. Medieval medicine functioned at the intersection of superstition, observation, and emerging scientific thought, shaping responses to illness in a world without modern understanding of pathogens. Physicians relied on humoral theory inherited from classical texts, interpreting disease through imbalances of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Treatment often combined herbal remedies, diet, and bloodletting, reflecting attempts to restore balance rather than target specific causes. Monasteries preserved medical knowledge, maintaining libraries, infirmaries, and gardens that supplied medicinal plants. Folk healers served rural communities, blending practical knowledge with tradition and spiritual belief. Hospitals gradually emerged as charitable institutions, offering care rather than cure to the poor and sick. Medicine revealed tension between tradition, necessity, and experimentation. Disease shaped medieval life profoundly, influencing population, migration, and belief as communities confronted epidemics with limited tools. The Black Death devastated Europe, killing millions and destabilizing feudal structures through labor shortages and social upheaval. Explanations ranged from divine punishment to corrupted air, revealing uncertainty and fear in the absence of scientific clarity. Quarantine and sanitation measures developed in response, demonstrating awareness of contagion even without germ theory. Survivors sought meaning through religion, charity, and reform, attempting to restore order amid grief. Economic shifts followed mortality, empowering laborers and reshaping land use. Disease revealed fragility and resilience within medieval society. Herbal medicine formed the foundation of treatment, drawing upon generations of observation and experimentation rooted in local ecology. Gardens cultivated plants such as sage, rosemary, and valerian, valued for antiseptic, digestive, and calming properties. Texts like herbals recorded recipes and identifications, bridging oral tradition and written knowledge. Trade expanded access to imported spices and resins, linking medicine to commerce and geography. Remedies varied by region, reflecting environmental resources and cultural preference. Distillation and preparation techniques demonstrated technical skill and curiosity. Herbal practice revealed empirical insight within constraint. Surgery existed as a distinct discipline, practiced by barbers, craftsmen, and battlefield specialists, rather than university-trained physicians. Techniques included amputation, cauterization, and trepanation, performed with limited anesthesia and high risk of infection. Manuals described instruments and methods, reflecting attempts to standardize practice despite limited theory. Surgeons learned through apprenticeship, gaining practical experience rather than scholarly instruction. Despite danger, surgery saved lives in trauma and warfare, offering intervention where herbal remedies were insufficient. Social status remained low for surgeons, reflecting association with manual labor rather than intellectual pursuit. Surgery embodied pragmatism and peril. Women played crucial roles in healthcare, serving as midwives, caretakers, and herbalists within households and communities. Midwifery supported childbirth with experience and ritual, mitigating mortality in a dangerous process. Women's knowledge of herbs and remedies often surpassed men's practical understanding, though rarely recognized in formal institutions. Ecclesiastical suspicion sometimes targeted female healers, blurring lines between medicine and accusations of sorcery. Yet communities depended on women's care for childbirth, illness, and elder support. Records reveal respect and trust within local networks despite institutional marginalization. Women's contribution reflected authority grounded in necessity. Medical learning evolved over time, integrating classical texts, Islamic scholarship, and empirical observation into expanding frameworks of knowledge. Universities taught Galenic theory, while translations introduced new perspectives on anatomy, pharmacy, and contagion. Physicians debated conflicting ideas, gradually questioning tradition through dissection and experimentation. Crises like plague spurred innovation in public health, quarantine, and sanitation. The Church's patronage preserved and transmitted knowledge, even as it limited investigation of anatomy and mortality. Medicine advanced slowly, shaped by fear, curiosity, and suffering. Medieval healthcare revealed complexity, adaptation, and enduring human effort to heal. Medieval religion shaped every dimension of life, influencing politics, community, and personal identity in ways that extended beyond doctrine into daily practice. The Church provided spiritual meaning, social services, and political authority, linking faith to governance and cultural unity. Monasteries served as centers of learning, agriculture, and charity, preserving knowledge while exercising economic influence. Parish churches structured community life through ritual, feast days, and moral oversight, integrating faith into calendar and custom. Pilgrimage embodied devotion and mobility, connecting distant regions through shared sacred destinations. Heresy threatened unity, prompting suppression and reform that revealed tension between authority and belief. Religion reflected power, devotion, and conflict. Faith shaped the worldview through scripture, ritual, and symbolism that explained suffering, fortune, and natural phenomena before scientific explanation. Sacraments marked life stages, baptism, marriage, and burial, reinforcing belonging and moral obligation. Saints and relics mediated between divine and human, offering hope and intercession in times of crisis. Artistic expression in manuscripts, sculpture, and architecture visualized theology, teaching through imagery where literacy was limited. Moral instruction emphasized charity, humility, and obedience, guiding behavior and reinforcing hierarchy. Plague, famine, and war intensified religious fervor, prompting movements of repentance and apocalyptic expectation. Religion framed human experience within cosmic order. Monasticism embodied discipline, scholarship, and agricultural self-sufficiency, shaping cultural and economic landscapes through labor and devotion. Monks followed strict rules, balancing prayer with work in structured routines that emphasized humility and stability. Scriptoriums preserved classical texts and produced manuscripts, safeguarding knowledge during periods of turmoil. Monastic estates managed land, livestock, and trade, influencing local economies and employment. Reform movements challenged corruption and complacency, demonstrating internal critique and aspiration for purity. Women's monastic houses provided education, stability, and limited autonomy despite restrictive expectations. Monastic life revealed dedication, complexity, and contradiction. The church wielded political power through landownership, taxation, and alliances that rivaled secular authority. Clergy advised rulers, legitimized coronations, and mediated conflict, intertwining governance with religious sanction. Papal authority asserted supremacy over kings, generating disputes that shaped law, diplomacy, and warfare. Crusades exemplified fusion of faith and politics, mobilizing armies under religious justification while advancing territorial and economic aims. Ecclesiastical courts enforced morality, marriage, and inheritance, shaping daily life through legal influence. Conflict between church and state revealed competing visions of sovereignty and legitimacy. Power and faith remained intimately connected. Religious dissent exposed limits of unity and control, prompting persecution and debate that shaped intellectual and institutional boundaries. Movements like the Cathars and Lollards criticized corruption and doctrine, questioning authority and demanding reform. Suppression involved inquisition, imprisonment, and force, demonstrating fear of fragmentation and loss of influence. Yet dissent influenced later reforms, revealing how resistance contributed to intellectual evolution. Mystics expressed spirituality outside rigid doctrine, blending personal experience with devotional literature. Popular religion incorporated local traditions and superstition, showing diversity beneath official unity. Dissent revealed complexity within belief. Architecture embodied faith through cathedrals and churches that dominated urban skylines and symbolized divine presence in stone and glass. Gothic design emphasized height, light, and harmony, reflecting aspiration toward heaven and mastery of engineering. Stained glass narrated scripture, illuminating instruction through color and imagery. Construction required immense labor and resources, integrating community through generations of work and donation. Cathedrals served as civic centers, hosting markets, courts, and ceremony beyond worship alone. Their endurance reflects both devotion and ambition. Medieval religion demonstrated continuity, transformation, and enduring impact on culture and identity. Medieval law evolved from customary practice, royal authority, and ecclesiastical influence, shaping social order and defining rights and obligations within communities. Custom governed local disputes, inheritance, and land use, reflecting tradition and collective memory. Royal courts centralized authority, standardizing procedures, and asserting jurisdiction over crime and conflict. Church courts adjudicated marriage, morality, and clerical matters, creating parallel legal systems with overlapping authority. Written codes gradually emerged, transforming oral tradition into recorded law. Punishment emphasized restitution and deterrence, varying by social class and circumstance. Law structured governance and everyday life. Crime reflected social anxiety, economic pressures, and moral values, revealing how communities understood threat and disorder. Theft and violence stemmed from poverty, feud, and instability, while heresy and blasphemy reflected tension between belief and authority. Accusation could be weaponized for personal gain, demonstrating vulnerability of marginalized individuals. Trials relied on oath-taking, witnesses, and sometimes ordeal, reflecting belief in divine judgment before scientific evidence. Execution and mutilation served as public spectacle, reinforcing authority and warning others. Sanctuary provided protection within churches, balancing justice with mercy. Crime revealed conflict between order and survival. Property law defined ownership, tenancy, and obligation, shaping rural and urban economies across estates and towns. Feudal tenure bound landholding to service and loyalty, linking agriculture to military and political structures. Commons provided shared resources, reflecting cooperation and conflict over pasture, forest, and water. Urban guilds regulated trade and craft, allocating rights and imposing discipline within markets. Inheritance customs balanced kinship, gender, and authority, shaping family continuity and property transfer. Disputes over land reflected power, ambition, and scarcity. Property law structured economy and hierarchy. Legal reform emerged through codification, royal assertion, and growing literacy that supported documentation and precedent. The rise of universities expanded study of Roman and canon law, creating professional expertise that shaped administration. Royal bureaucracies standardized procedures, promoting consistency across regions. Written contracts facilitated commerce, credit, and urban expansion, reflecting growing complexity. Appeals provided mechanisms for challenging decisions, revealing tension between authority and fairness. Reform demonstrated aspiration for order within changing societies. Law adapted to new realities. Social status influenced legal outcomes, reflecting hierarchy more than abstract equality. Nobles enjoyed privilege and immunity, receiving leniency for offenses that brought harsh punishment for commoners. Clergy claimed benefit of clergy, shifting cases to ecclesiastical courts. Women faced restrictions in testimony and inheritance, though widows sometimes exercised economic and legal autonomy. Serfs remained tied to land, owing labor and dues without full protection under law. Justice served power as much as principle. Legal inequality was structural rather than incidental. Despite limitations, medieval law laid foundations for modern systems through codification, precedent, and institutional development. Royal courts established principles of jurisdiction and accountability that influenced later constitutional frameworks. Written charter and oath traditions shaped ideas of consent and obligation. Contract law supported commerce, enabling markets and long-distance trade. The tension between custom and reform revealed adaptability rather than rigidity. Medieval law reflected human effort to create order within conflict and complexity. Medieval warfare evolved through shifting technologies, tactics, and political ambitions that reshaped borders and societies. Mounted knights symbolized aristocratic power, but infantry and archers proved decisive in many conflicts. Castles served as defensive strongholds and administrative centers, anchoring territorial control. Sieges defined warfare more than open battle, emphasizing endurance, supply, and engineering over simple combat. Mercenaries expanded armies beyond feudal levies, reflecting monetization of military service. Religion influenced war aims, legitimizing campaigns through ideology. Warfare shaped hierarchy, taxation, and diplomacy. Strategy combined geography, logistics, and morale, reflecting constraints beyond battlefield valor. Rivers, mountains, and roads determined movement, supply, and vulnerability. Fortifications required prolonged planning, negotiation, and resources rather than rapid conquest. Commanders balanced intimidation with negotiation, using displays of force to secure submission. Propaganda framed conflict as righteous, shaping public support and cohesion. Victory depended on discipline and resilience more than individual heroism. War became political tool as much as armed struggle. Technological change transformed combat effectiveness through gradual refinement rather than sudden revolution. Longbows, crossbows, and early gunpowder weapons shifted advantage from elite cavalry to common infantry. Improved armor reflected adaptation to missile threats while maintaining mobility. Siege engines, trebuchets, mangonels, and battering rams exploited engineering knowledge. Naval expansion enabled coastal raids and control of trade routes. Logistics sustained campaigns through grain, fodder, and taxation. Technology altered balance of power and strategy. War impacted civilian life, shaping economy, migration, and cultural memory. Armies requisitioned crops, livestock, and housing, linking warfare to famine and displacement. Towns fortified walls and militias to deter assault, blending civic duty with survival. Refugees fled conflict zones, spreading news, disease, and labor patterns. Reconstruction required cooperation and negotiation, revealing resilience amid devastation. Ballads and chronicles memorialized conflict, shaping identity and legacy. Civilians bore consequences beyond political goals. Diplomacy accompanied warfare, reflecting preference for resolution when cost exceeded advantage. Treaties formalized borders, succession, and ransom, intertwining law with military outcome. Hostages and marriages symbolized trust and alliance, though betrayal remained common. Negotiation preserved resources, allowing rulers to consolidate victory without prolonged conflict. Diplomacy required literacy, calculation, and cultural understanding. War and peace existed as intertwined strategies. Power operated through force and negotiation alike. Legacy of medieval warfare influenced nationhood, military hierarchy, and technological progression. Standing armies emerged from mercenary reliance, professionalizing military structure. Gunpowder laid foundations for modern artillery and fortification redesign. Taxation and bureaucracy expanded to sustain campaigns, strengthening central authority. Memory of war shaped patriotism, trauma, and narrative. Medieval warfare revealed humanity's capacity for innovation, destruction, and adaptation. Medieval commerce developed through expanding markets, trade routes, and urbanization, transforming economies and reshaping social mobility. Local markets enabled exchange of food, tools, and textiles, anchoring rural and urban interaction. Merchants traveled regional circuits, connecting villages to towns and fairs. Long-distance trade linked Europe to Asia and Africa through Mediterranean and overland routes. Banking emerged to support credit, currency exchange, and risk management. Guilds regulated quality and competition, shaping production and price. Commerce fostered opportunity and inequality. Towns grew as commercial hubs, attracting artisans, migrants, and institutions seeking economic advantage. Urban charters granted rights and autonomy, encouraging settlement and investment. Workshops specialized in crafts, from leatherworking to metalwork and cloth. Market squares structured economic and social life, integrating trade with community ritual. Pollution, overcrowding, and disease accompanied growth, revealing cost of prosperity. Wealth concentrated among merchant elites. Urbanization transformed landscape and hierarchy. International trade expanded through maritime innovation, navigation, and cooperation between diverse cultures. Italian city-states dominated Mediterranean exchange, transporting spices, silk, and grain. Hanseatic League merchants controlled Baltic and North Sea trade, establishing networks of ports and warehouses. Cultural interaction facilitated transmission of knowledge, technology, and art alongside goods. Risk from piracy, warfare, and weather demanded insurance and convoy protection. Trade blurred boundaries between religion and culture. Commerce fostered interdependence across regions. Finance evolved to support increasing scale and complexity of economic activity. Bills of exchange enabled secure transfer of wealth without physical coin. Banking families accumulated influence through credit and investment. Double-entry bookkeeping improved accounting accuracy and planning. Taxation systems expanded to fund public works and warfare, binding economy to state. Economic ethics debated profit, usury, and fair price. Finance institutionalized wealth and power. Consumption shaped identity through clothing, architecture, and luxury goods that displayed status. Sumptuary laws attempted to limit extravagance, preserving hierarchy through regulation. Domestic architecture reflected prosperity through stone houses and glazed windows. Imported goods symbolized connection to broader world and aspiration beyond local custom. Consumer culture emerged alongside religious warnings against excess. Material culture mirrored ambition and mobility. Commerce expressed values and aspirations. Economic expansion reshaped labor, class, and opportunity. Serfs sought freedom through urban migration and negotiated tenure. Apprenticeships structured craft training and socialization. Women participated in textile production, trade, and household management despite legal limitations. Wealth challenged noble privilege, enabling merchant ascent. Economic growth produced conflict, innovation, and transformation. Commerce reshaped medieval society's foundations. Medieval education evolved through monastic schools, cathedral institutions, and universities, shaping intellectual life and cultural continuity. Literacy centered on clergy, linking learning to scripture and doctrine. Monastic libraries preserved classical texts, enabling continuity of ancient knowledge. Cathedral schools trained clergy in grammar, rhetoric, and theology. Universities formalized scholarship, granting degrees in disciplines that shaped intellectual hierarchy. Debate and commentary advanced understanding through structured argument. Education anchored faith and inquiry. Curriculum expanded beyond theology to law, medicine, and philosophy, reflecting practical and intellectual needs. Logic and dialectic structured reasoning and dispute, shaping method rather than belief. Medical instruction integrated classical texts with observation and practice. Legal studies supported administration, commerce, and centralized governance. Philosophy bridged faith and reason, exploring ethics, nature, and metaphysics. Translation movements transmitted Arabic and Greek knowledge. Curriculum reflected synthesis rather than conflict. Universities fostered scholarly community, regulation, and institutional identity. Students traveled internationally, creating cosmopolitan networks of learning. Masters governed instruction and discipline through collegial authority. Degrees signified expertise and legitimacy, shaping career and prestige. Disputes over curriculum, authority, and funding reflected political context. Universities negotiated with rulers for privileges and autonomy. Institutional learning reshaped knowledge and society. Education influenced social mobility despite restricted access and hierarchy. Clergy advanced through literacy, administration, and court service. Merchants and professionals benefited from numeracy and legal understanding. Noble children received training in diplomacy, warfare, and estate management. Women's education varied by class, with convents offering rare opportunities for literacy. Access revealed inequality and aspiration. Learning shaped destiny and structure. Intellectual life balanced tradition with reinterpretation, challenging and reinforcing doctrine. Scholasticism sought reconciliation of faith and reason, elevating logic while affirming theology. Heresy and censorship revealed limits of inquiry, but also stimulated debate. Libraries expanded, cataloging texts and commentaries for reference. Public lectures and disputations cultivated shared methods and vocabulary. Knowledge advanced through dialogue, preservation, and adaptation. Intellectual life reflected constraint and creativity. Legacy of medieval education persisted through universities, legal systems, and scientific inquiry that evolved from scholastic foundations. Methods of argument and documentation influenced modern research and scholarship. Preservation of classical texts enabled Renaissance and Enlightenment transformation. Educational structures supported bureaucratic governance and economic complexity. Learning fostered resilience amid crisis and change. Medieval education shaped trajectory of Western thought and institutions. Medieval society grappled with scarcity and abundance in cycles that shaped culture, technology, and hierarchy across generations. Agricultural systems relied on climate, labor, and land rights, producing instability during drought, flood, or soil exhaustion. Crop rotation, manuring, and drainage improved yields gradually, reflecting incremental adaptation rather than sudden innovation. Lords extracted rents and labor, linking power to land control and peasant survival. Famine revealed fragility of subsistence economies, prompting migration, rebellion, or religious interpretation of suffering. Communal solutions emerged through shared resources, charity, and village governance. Scarcity defined resilience and conflict in equal measure. Food production shaped gender roles, social organization, and technological development, influencing how communities allocated labor and authority. Women's contributions in dairy, textile processing, and household agriculture sustained families and local economies. Tools like plows and mills expanded productivity, linking innovation to social hierarchy through control of equipment. Lords monopolized mills and ovens, demonstrating how technology could reinforce privilege. Seasonal rhythms structured labor, ritual, and household survival strategies. Feasts and fasts reflected religious and cultural meaning embedded in food. Agriculture connected identity, obligation, and survival. Trade mitigated scarcity by redistributing resources across regions, linking communities through cooperation and profit. Grain imports stabilized cities during poor harvests, demonstrating economic foresight. Maritime routes carried salt, fish, and wine, connecting coasts to inland markets. Storage techniques, granaries, cellars, and salting extended preservation and protected populations against shortage. Merchants profited, while governments regulated prices to prevent unrest. Access to food determined loyalty and stability. Famine shaped policy and collective memory. Communities responded to crisis through social networks, religious interpretation, and political pressure, revealing adaptive capacity within constraint. Charity and almsgiving reinforced moral duty and communal cohesion. Religious institutions organized relief, offering sanctuary and sustenance during hardship. Uprisings occurred when authority failed to protect or provide, exposing tension between ruler and ruled. Government interventions included price controls, rationing, and punitive measures. Memory of famine influenced culture and custom. Crisis shaped reform and resilience. Scarcity fueled innovation, prompting improvements in crop choice, irrigation, and livestock management. Hardier grains replaced vulnerable staples, reducing dependence on single crops. Water meadows and drainage increased fertility, reflecting environmental adaptation. Investment in mills mechanized grinding, reducing labor while increasing output. Livestock breeding enhanced strength, wool quality, and dairy production. Policies encouraged reclamation of marginal land. Innovation emerged from necessity rather than abundance. Legacy of medieval subsistence systems persisted in land rights, agricultural knowledge, and environmental management that influenced later eras. The balance between innovation and exploitation shaped future economic systems. Lessons from famine informed public policy, charity, and social responsibility. Infrastructure built during crisis supported long-term growth. Population pressures exposed vulnerability and fostered cooperation. Medieval food systems revealed complexity beneath pastoral imagery. Survival was collective as much as individual. Medieval culture expressed identity through art, music, and ritual, shaping memory and belonging in societies without widespread literacy. Oral tradition preserved history, law, and storytelling, reinforcing collective identity through performance. Epic poetry celebrated heroism and lineage, linking past to present through narrative. Visual art in manuscripts and frescoes conveyed knowledge and devotion, accessible to all regardless of literacy. Music structured worship, ceremony, and community celebration, blending sacred and secular experience. Festivals unified social groups through shared meaning. Culture encoded values, hierarchy, and aspiration. Architecture symbolized power, devotion, and civic pride through monumental construction that required cooperation and skill. Cathedrals and castles dominated landscapes, asserting authority through scale and endurance. Urban guild halls and bridges reflected civic ambition and economic growth. Construction integrated engineering, artistry, and communal labor across generations. Decoration communicated theology, law, and memory through imagery and inscription. Architecture anchored community identity in stone. Built environment shaped experience and belonging. Craft production connected skill, creativity, and livelihood, revealing complexity of labor beyond subsistence agriculture. Textiles, metalwork, and pottery blended function with aesthetic, supporting trade and status. Apprenticeship transmitted technique and ethics across generations, linking identity to craft. Guilds codified standards and protected economic interests. Artistic influence traveled through trade, pilgrimage, and conquest. Material culture revealed adaptation and aspiration. Craftsmanship embodied labor, pride, and legacy. Leisure and entertainment expressed shared values and provided relief from labor, shaping community cohesion. Games, storytelling, and music offered escape and reflection. Tournaments displayed martial skill, reinforcing aristocratic identity and hierarchy. Processions and festivals celebrated religious and civic milestones, blending ritual with spectacle. Folk customs preserved memory and identity outside elite culture. Leisure reflected social divide and unity. Recreation humanized daily struggle. Cultural exchange enriched medieval society through interaction with Islamic, Byzantine, and African civilizations. Translation movements brought philosophy, science, and medicine to Europe. Trade introduced artistic styles, technologies, and materials. Pilgrimage facilitated contact across language and belief. Conquest spread ideas alongside conflict. Cultural borrowing challenged assumptions and expanded horizons. Exchange shaped identity and innovation. Legacy of medieval culture endured through language, ritual, art, and memory that shaped later societies. Cathedrals, music, and literature continue to influence modern imagination. Preservation and reinterpretation reveal continuity and change. Cultural forms adapted to new political and economic contexts. Historical narratives shaped identity and nationalism. Medieval culture left marks deeper than monuments. It shaped worldview and inheritance. The medieval world emerged not as a simple age of superstition and hardship, but as a complex landscape shaped by adaptation, innovation, and struggle. Power structures evolved through negotiation and conflict, balancing authority with resistance. Communities confronted famine, disease, and war with ingenuity that revealed resilience rather than helplessness. Knowledge advanced through preservation and reinterpretation, laying groundwork for future transformation. Religion offered meaning and structure, while dissent revealed capacity for questioning and change. Culture expressed identity and continuity through craft, ritual, and memory. The period's legacy shaped modern society in ways often overlooked. Human experience in the Middle Ages reflected universal themes of survival, ambition, fear, and hope. Disease devastated populations but encouraged public health measures and social reform. War claimed lives but prompted technological and administrative evolution. Famine revealed vulnerability but inspired cooperation and charity. Authority centralized, yet local communities retained agency. Culture flourished amid constraint, proving hardship did not extinguish creativity. The era embodied contradiction and transformation. The end of the medieval period did not erase its achievements or failures, but transformed them into foundations for new eras. Renaissance learning built upon preserved texts and methodologies. State bureaucracy emerged from feudal conflict and taxation. Capitalism traced roots to merchant networks and banking innovation. Scientific inquiry expanded from scholastic reasoning and debate. Colonial expansion drew on navigational advancements and trade ambition. Continuity bridged medieval and modern worlds. Historical memory often simplifies the Middle Ages into darkness or romance, obscuring lived reality behind myth. Documentary evidence, letters, legal codes, chronicles reveals nuance beyond stereotype. Archaeology uncovers material culture that challenges assumptions. Art and architecture testify to aspiration and belief. Social history restores voices of peasants, women, and laborers. Interdisciplinary study reveals complexity and contradiction. The medieval world demands understanding rather than dismissal. In examining this period, we uncover patterns that resonate in contemporary society: pandemic, inequality, migration, faith, and conflict. Human resilience appears across centuries, reflected in adaptation to crisis and pursuit of stability. Technological change continues to disrupt hierarchy and power. Cultural exchange shapes identity and innovation. Governance struggles with legitimacy and participation. Memory influences ideology and narrative. History provides context and caution. The Middle Ages remind us that progress is neither linear nor inevitable, but achieved through struggle, cooperation, and imagination across time. Their legacy endures in law, language, faith, and institution, shaping societies that followed. The human capacity for cruelty and compassion existed side by side, challenging assumptions of superiority or simplicity. Understanding the medieval world expands our perspective on resilience and transformation. If this documentary opened your eyes, subscribe and tell us which forgotten chapter of history we should uncover next.